So this is the January 30th, 2018 meeting of the Planning Board. It is just after 7:30. And welcome to everybody in the audience. And Judy Barrett is back with us to continue our discussion regarding the duplex moratorium and potential zoning amendments for the 2018 town meeting, which is coming up right around the corner. And Ms. Barrett, between the last time you were here and this time, you did a couple of surveys.
Yep.
And would you like to review your results?
Sure. I was trying to get a sense of the thinking of the board members as individuals about kind of where there were opportunities to agree to compromise. Because I know this has been a difficult decision, it's been a difficult topic here, and so I did one survey and there were some things that came out of it that made me think I should just kind of ask a few more questions. But to sift it down into easy terms, I won't say that there is a unanimous position about anything, because that's not the case. What I did get a sense of was that there was a majority support for the idea of requiring a special permit for two-family, separate from where they're allowed, separate from anything else, but just the permitting process. That there seemed to be majority support for that. And if that's what you want to do, that's an easy amendment to the zoning bylaw. There were other questions where there seemed to be a majority support as well. And bear in mind that some of the questions were a ranking, some of them were pick all that you like. So when you're asking questions like choose all the ones that apply, you know, you can get a majority that might be a little bit different from perhaps the way some other questions were answered. So I'm not negating anything that anybody said. I just sort of want to explain to you that the way you ask the question sometimes affects how these numbers come out. But there seemed to be agreement, at least among a majority of the board members, that two-family dwellings that are going to be allowed should be limited to conversion of existing properties, which seemed to be a little bit of a disconnect for me to some of the other comments I heard, which was we're losing older single-family homes to two-family dwellings. So if you're then going to limit it to conversion, that's kind of what you're saying you want to have. So that outcome seemed inconsistent to me. But nonetheless, I'm just telling you what the responses were. And then the third thing that I heard that seemed to be a majority support was that wherever you are going to allow two-family dwellings, and I mean by district, that there should be some increase in the minimum lot area. And there was not necessarily a lot of agreement about what that should be, but that there should be an increase in the minimum lot area. So there seemed to be, I guess, a tendency toward doubling it, but I can't even say that was a majority. It was just, because people were sometimes answering one or two. You ask a question, you've got a small board here. So if two people are saying something, I'm giving that credence, but it's different than three, and it's certainly different from four. So there was clearly a sense that the minimum lot area should be increased. Not so much clarity about how much. But those are the things that kind of came to light from the survey. So then I thought, well, I know you have to make some kind of decision here because this has been a controversy and a difficult one for the town. So I decided to go back and look at where the zoning was before the big update was done in 2009, because frankly, it was a long time ago and I don't remember all this. So I went back and looked just to refresh my memory, and as you can tell from the memo I gave you, the two-family dwellings were allowed as of right or by special permit in the residential districts. And so we didn't really change that except in RA and RB. There have been a lot of discussion about, does it make any sense to even have, quote, two-family dwellings in that larger lot district? Because it's a lot of land for a single structure. The market doesn't necessarily make sense. There aren't, as you can see from the map, there aren't a lot of them anyway. So the planning board and the zoning committee opted instead for the possibility that the larger homes in the outlying parts of town could have an accessory apartment if they wanted to. So you weren't exactly taking away the entire opportunity to have another dwelling unit on the lot, but it would clearly be accessory and subordinate to rather than independent from. But as for kind of the other pieces of the zoning, other than sort of adding, we just certainly did, the board added some types of uses that were not clearly provided for, but the basic framework for how two families were regulated didn't really change. So then there was a whole discussion back then about dimensional regulations, and I just really want to kind of bring this up because I think it is something the board is going to want to think about, if not now, then going forward. And that is, you have established neighborhoods in your town. They are built out. So what's going to change is going to happen through reuse, repurposing of existing structures. This is kind of what we talked about 10 years ago, but the town didn't have an appetite at the time for looking at dimensional regulations in the RA, RB, RC, and general residence districts. Even if you said, we're not going to allow any more two-family homes, if you don't do something about the dimensional table and how it relates to dwelling units, height, coverage, or open space requirements, or however you want to do it, I think you're going to see structures that you're going to deem to be inconsistent with the character of neighborhoods, not because it's single family or two family, but because of scale. So my thought was, and again, this is entirely a decision for the board, I don't want to impose anything on you, that where you have a master plan process starting, that perhaps what you might want to do is do what you need to do now to sort of arrest control, as much control as you can, over the problem that you see, and then if there are going to be bigger land use policy changes, deal with them in the context of the master plan rather than trying to deal with them now. Now, that's just my opinion as a planner. I understand it's the board's decision, but there's enough tension here and enough kind of disagreement about sort of bigger things that it seems to me as though, at the very least, a special permit requirement buys you the ability to look on a case-by-case basis at whether a site is appropriate for proposed structure, which is typically why communities have a special permit requirement, is to be able to look on a case-by-case basis. But that's kind of where this is. There, as I said, there seems to be agreement about the preferability of a discretionary permit process, some preference for perhaps limiting this to conversion of existing structures, and some consensus around increasing the minimum lot area for a two-family dwelling.
So when you say the conversion of existing structures, are you meaning that the four walls will remain
Not necessarily.
the same, or the foundation remains the same, footprint remains the same, or?
Not necessarily.
Oh, it could be a tear down?
So how would you stop it from being a tear down? You'd have to define it that way?
Well, you would have to have special regulations for conversion of an existing structure to clarify that tear down is not allowed. You know, you can say that. You can say a certain amount of expansion is all right to accommodate a two-family dwelling, but put a cap on it. I mean, you can do things like that. You can, because it's a special permit and it's limited to a specific class of properties. So the rules just need to be clear.
Right.
Right, I think some towns where I read it said it had to be the same footprint and the same walls, and the
Yeah.
conversion was inside.
That would not be typical for two-family regulations, but I do agree that some limitation on the conversion is not uncommon. I would agree with that.
Because I was just thinking about your comment that it sort of didn't coincide with the other viewpoint that we wanted to maintain the older structures in town. So I was thinking
Right.
if by conversion you mean you work with what you've got, then that seems to make sense. But
I mean,
that's not necessarily the case.
That is an option the board has.
Okay. George or Leslie, you have some questions for Judy?
Oh, yes. I'm the one that's not part of the majority, so
Right.
maybe I'll just speak out and say how I feel about this. I don't have a problem with the two families. The map shows quite a few two families, and most of them I find to be pretty decent and not at all offensive. I have a two-family in my neighborhood. It's kitty corner from my house. I had no problem when they put it up. It's about 15, 20 years later. I still have no problem with it. I don't care if there's a two-family in my neighborhood. It's a bigger dwelling than my house is. It doesn't bother me. I'm not afraid of two-family houses. So I agree that I think a special permit might be a good idea. And I say that because of the structures that were put up at the intersection of Summer Street and Route 135, where they were built too close to the road, potentially dangerous depending on whether people are turning around in their driveway or backing out. And that could have been caught at a hearing for a special permit and corrected. So I would be willing to go along with that. As far as increasing lot size, you're basically saying, no, we don't allow two families in our town. So I would be absolutely opposed to that. A good part of Residence C is built out in subdivisions where people have minimum lot sizes. And that effectively, if you increase the size that you have to have for two-family, you basically said you can't have them. And I completely disagree with that. Height-wise, I mean, I guess we have some experts in the audience, and I'd like to hear comments on whether or not height restrictions would make any sense. So I guess that's my 2 cents.
I'm good for now.
Michelle?
So as I was looking over the map at where we had approved for two families to be, I wanted to know what your feedback was to thinking about opening it up to industrial land, opening it up to even business south. Looking at those areas, there's some parcels over there that I'm not quite sure will ever get developed the way we would like them to be developed. And I think those are excellent locations to put them over there. I would also open it up to business east. I just don't think the business east, we already went through that with the neighborhood, and I don't think they'd accept it. Most of the feedback I've been getting is it's the RC and the general residential that are the concerns. I'd love to see more of it in RA and RB. I think it would be great out there. And with the MSR and the DN, which is basically downtown, you got a lot of those old historical buildings that would look great for conversions. I do agree sometimes if you go into their basements, it's a little scary, so you may not be able to. I think the board has to take that in consideration, because I've seen some of these basements where they have to be a tear down, just because they're fieldstone and they're actually crumbling out from underneath the building. And that's something to take into consideration when you have those buildings along Main Street, if you can't do anything. But I would love to see, and think about opening up to industrial and business south. I just think,
I would like to ask you a question, because you've been in the industry here. Do you have any thoughts on why there weren't more two-family homes built in RA and RB when they were allowed by special permit? Because that was on the books for a long time.
I have no idea.
Okay, just was
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. To be honest with you, I don't have anyone who asks me for a duplex or two-family. I will tell you that there's one thing that I see popping up, and I have so many people asking why we don't have, it's being done over at Compass Point. Does anyone know where that is? It's over in Boylston. And there are very small, single families.
Cottages.
Exactly. Almost right up against each other. And there's something about, and they're willing to pay anything for it, 5, 6, there's, But those are the people who are downsizing from larger colonials who will say, I would love to have something like that. The duplex situation is not everybody likes it. Not everybody likes to share the same roof. There's no association that goes with it. There's a lot of issues. I don't have a lot of requests for it. I have to say, and I know you guys are in the audience, I mean, the work that has been done here is very good, and no one's saying that what's out there isn't. I think it's the areas that people are starting to see them go up in. They're really concerned, and they're really concerned in the RC district. Really concerned about that. And so that's where I think you're probably going to get a lot of backlash at town meeting. RC and GR, those two districts, people are coming out. The others, I think people would be open to.
Okay, the past couple weeks, I've been reading all the community development plans again, master plan and everything. And my question first coming forward was, what purpose are the duplexes filling? Because like Michelle said, people aren't calling for them. And the feedback I've been getting from the residents, a lot of the kids in school, like, the class sizes are full. And the people are complaining about the class sizes. They move here to this town, single-family residential, and their class sizes are now creeping up to 28, 25, 24. And with the new duplexes, multifamily, we don't want to have to build new schools in town or have to add to the town services. So they're afraid of the increasing taxes and the increase in school sizes. So, that was one of the concerns I heard. Duplexes also are actually now taking away from the available, more affordable housing stock. A lot of times when like $200,000 to $400,000 house comes on sale, for sale, it's a smaller house where a first-time starter family could come in and say, you know, I can afford this, and maybe if I get more money, I can fix it up and renovate. But if someone grabs it, that $300,000 house, and builds a duplex with two $500,000 sides, now they're priced out of the town. So what they're seeing is, the duplexes they're seeing are too expensive, where they would like to see small, single-family homes, like Michelle said. I've heard a lot of that, too, but the opportunities to buy the older starter homes are going away, and one little small starter home that might be 1,200 square feet is now being replaced with a duplex that might have between 2,500 and 3,500 square feet on each side. So you're taking the smallest lots in town, the RCs, the GRs, taking off a small house and putting on a duplex that has, each side is now bigger than the small house that it replaced. So those also look out of character, so they're concerned about that. When you read our zoning bylaws, there are restrictions on building a single-family house. So if you build on an RC, a 20,000 square foot house, you have to follow the minimum lot width and the front side, side backs, all that. But now, essentially by allowing duplexes on the same size lot, you're allowing two homes to be built on a 20,000 square foot lot. So I know when people do additions, at least in the past, if you did an addition on your house, which might be 1,500 square feet, you're only allowed to add on 50% of the square feet, because I know people who've done that. But if you
That's a
tore,
non-conforming situation, right?
Yeah.
so you could only, say you had a 3,000 or 2,000 square foot house, you can only add another 1,000. But if you wanted to build duplex, you can now tear down that house, and you can put up two,
That's been changed though, Amy. It's
Oh,
not-
okay.
It's not 50% anymore.
is it gone away?
We're either at 80 or 90%,
Oh, wow.
which Judy had a heart attack about when we changed that.
Right, well, because now you have big houses there too. But either way, like, when our bylaws were first written, you could build a single-family house on 20,000 square feet with 100 lot frontage, but now you can put two houses
But you
on
could do that
20,000.
since 1963.
Oh, I know, but I'm just
Okay.
saying, it's getting bigger. For some reason, the duplexes are getting bigger and bigger.
But Amy, I think this, and not to argue with you, but I think that's why I keep coming back to, so why don't you consider putting dimensional controls in place instead
Right.
of just outright prohibiting them?
Well, I agree too with, but one of the things in your memo that you wrote, that when you decided to take them out of RA and RB, it's because you wanted to preserve the established single-family pattern.
Well, it's also because nothing was there.
Right.
I mean, we were looking at the market and water availability. I mean, there was a whole conversation that went on about what is that part of town and what is being built there. And as I said, you know, not to argue with you, but there were nobody was building two-family homes out there. And
Right.
my experience, for whatever it's worth, is that they don't get built on big, large lots because the land cost is too high. So,
Right, but
So
the
that's
planning
all.
board were in charge of character and aesthetic, so it should be in the hands of the planning board versus the smaller, cheaper lots are now the ones being built with the bigger houses.
so again, I mean, if you were going to do a special permit required, you could do a planning board special
Right.
permit. Doesn't exist.
But I'm not sure, like, when we look through the numbers that we got for, people who say they want duplexes, or at least, you know, for more affordability. When you look at our affordability, Northborough is not a snobby town.
Duplexes have nothing to do with affordability.
No, they don't.
Right, so, but you know what's
Absolutely
interesting to me is, and Michelle, especially because, again, you're in the industry, if we can all agree that this isn't about affordability, because they're expensive,
Right.
there's two ways to look at this. One is you can say, people are coming along and scooping up these single-family homes and building duplexes. But you could also say, somebody's buying them. And I think an interesting point about this whole discussion here, again, I'm coming in from the outside, is no one seems to know anything about why people are buying them and who's buying them. Are they generating a bunch of kids? I have no idea. I mean, I'm not going down that path anyway because there's civil rights issues. But, you know, I think that it's just interesting to me that why do people build a product? It's because someone wants it. And I don't know what the desire is that the two-family homes are meeting, but they're meeting something. I don't know what it is.
Well, it's because it's new construction. That's what it
Okay.
is.
Right.
It's the bottom line, it's, everyone wants new construction.
Yeah.
So rather, if I can't afford a $700,000 or $800,000 house,
Yeah.
maybe I can afford a $400,000 or $500,000.
So there's a price point that it is reaching,
Exactly.
but it's not affordable, but I mean, it's a price point that
Right.
apparently isn't met through some other means here.
Well, you just look at the surrounding towns, so if I go back to that, like Westboro's 55,000 square feet with 250 feet of frontage. Like, why is Northborough down so low? Like, yeah,
Well, 55 for a two-family, 50 for one.
right,
Are you opposed to duplexes,
Yeah.
period?
yep.
Yeah.
So, you know, with respect to the increase in school size, they're going to have to build an awful lot of duplexes all at once in one neighborhood in order to really affect the increase in school size. And there's also, we are permitted to do redistricting for the schools, if in fact that should happen. But I would think that a development project that large is going to require a bigger process than what we're talking about here. Popping up a few duplexes in one neighborhood is not going to grossly affect classroom sizes. I think it's a fear that people have, but I don't think it's well-founded in fact. I think it's easy to cling on to it, but again, unless you have some discernible evidence of it, you know, I think that it's not something that should really be focused on.
Now,
And myself, based upon my conversations with people in my neighborhood and other people in the town, I'm not opposed to these duplexes. I don't like necessarily the way that size that they take on in some areas, like the one on 135 at Summer Street.
Yeah.
It's too big for where it is.
Yep.
And I think that's where the problem is, and that's a dimensional problem.
Yep.
So we reduce the height, and then the rest comes by way of special permit. I think that addresses many of these problems. I don't think that duplexes are appropriate in every district that we have, but that doesn't mean that they're not appropriate in some districts. There are some places, like off in the Pinehurst neighborhood, where there's some back there.
Pine Haven.
Pine Haven, rather, where there's some back there that are very well situated, I think. And, you know, there are certain neighborhoods where they are
Can you orient
appropriate.
me where that is? Just
Yeah, that's across the street from Lowe's Market. There's a street right down there.
Oh, okay, all right, yeah.
Yeah, so there's like a really small neighborhood before you get into some of the ranch-style houses. It's backed up closer to the Route 20 area, and it fits in perfectly there. There are places where duplexes seem to be just fine, and even interspersed amongst some of the regular single-family home neighborhoods, they seem to be fine. I think that it just becomes offensive when you've got a small ranch-sized house that suddenly is two side-by-side duplexes
Yep.
on a single lot, and that's hard for a lot of people to swallow. I wouldn't be opposed to a height restriction, I wouldn't be opposed to a special permit before the planning board, nor would I be opposed to saying if you are doing a tear down, you can only put up one duplex.
You mean one single-family home?
If you're tearing down a single-family home to put up a duplex, you can only put up one, not two. So you end up with 2 units, not 4.
I see what you're saying, okay.
On 135, they tore down Mr. Jones's house, or whoever's house that was.
Well, they took one from 1 to 4.
And so there's 4 units there, because they put 2 side-by-side duplexes.
He had a lot of land.
So that's sort of where I'm at with it. I'm not opposed to them, I just think that they need to be looked at just a little bit closer to make sure they're in keeping with the neighborhood. So,
So if I could chime in for a second, just a couple of thoughts. Number one, there are some houses in town that are kind of old. And sometimes you'll find that there's elderly people living in there. They've been retired since they turned age 62. And they're on a fixed income. And when the house starts to have problems, there's nothing they can do about it. But it's their house, they've lived there for years, and so they continue to live there as the house further and further deteriorates. When they eventually either pass away, head off to a nursing home, or go to live with one of their kids or whatever, that house is a mess. And in a lot of cases, it is not economically feasible to gut it and start again. The only thing that's feasible is a tear down. And nobody's going to tear it down if they're going to have to build a small, single-family house unless they give the homeowner peanuts for it. The homeowner can actually get a fair amount of money if the builder's going to make a nice profit at the end. But if the builder's only going to be restricted to putting a small, single-family house that fits in with the neighborhood, they're not going to do it. There's no profit in that. There's no incentive. So therefore, there's no incentive for the person to sell because they can't get any kind of decent money because the house is a mess. It's a tear down that can't be replaced. Economically, it can't be replaced. So we have to think about that pretty, carefully. The other thing is there's the rule of thumb, and I'm sure Michelle will tell you this. Don't be the most expensive house in your neighborhood because you'll never get your money back. If the duplexes are going to be the most expensive house, but people still want them, how does that impact the people who have the smaller houses? Their house goes up in value. It doesn't go down in value, it goes up in value because there's more expensive housing on the street.
I don't know if I would agree with that, George, only because I look at the the duplex that was put up on 135, in the Northgate area. It's on 135, but it's just before Northgate. And if you drive up Jethro Peters, Thaddeus Mason, that area, there's two houses right there. When they go into the backyard, all they have is a looming structure over their head. That was never there. It used to be just a tree line, and there was a much smaller house on the lot up above. I'm willing to bet, and I don't have any empirical evidence, but I'm willing to bet that if they'll put those houses on the market, there's going to be a price reduction because my view in the backyard is now somebody else's, actually somebody's kitchen window is now into my bedroom window.
Unless somebody's buying it with the intent of redeveloping it.
Yeah, but those houses on Jethro Peters and that area were
Are all
built
huge
in 92.
colonials.
They're pretty big colonials,
see,
4 or
yeah.
5 bedrooms.
Yep.
Built within the last 20 years, 25 years, so.
But your example is so interesting to me. I had the privilege last year of working on the housing element of Burlington's master plan, and there was a lot of concern on the master plan committee about tear downs, because it's been rampant in that part of the state. And so we did some survey work for the housing element, and there were some public meetings, and one of the things that came out of that, which was a little bit of a glass of cold water thrown in everybody's face, were the property owners who said, yeah, I've got this stuff going up in my neighborhood that I don't like, it's bigger than my home and so forth. But then other people said, but it's lifting the property values in our neighborhood, and it's better than what it was. So there's this tension around,
Right.
not advocating for one position or another, except to point out that there is tension about this from a property owner's point of view. Like, as you said, if someone's owned something with the expectation or the thought that they could sell it for a certain type of asset, and they can't, well, that's taking money out of somebody's pocket, and all of a sudden, they're not quite so willing,
Right.
to impose limitations. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but I just want you to know that when you actually go out into the community and talk to the people who are affected by that kind of change, not only the folks who don't like the housing, but just generally talk to people, I think you're going to find there's a bit of a mixed bag.
Oh, I'm sure there
You know,
is. I mean,
yeah.
I'm sure that there's as many people who want to be able to sell their 80-year-old home to a developer as there are people who don't want to see that in their backyard because of what it will do to either their view or their property values or whatever.
But it's, in response to that, if somebody put a massive colonial on there, they'd be looking at a massive colonial.
Right. no-
And the people in the massive colonial will be looking downhill into their house anyway.
Right.
What's the difference?
So,
You have four eyes instead of 2 eyes looking.
Which-
What's the difference?
there is no difference, and that's my point when I said that I'd like to see some height restrictions and special permitting in place for these projects, because there is an appropriate way to put them into town, but just not necessarily the way that some of these projects have been done, because there's been no
I
restrictions.
hear what
on
you're
them.
saying, but I think those duplexes are not any taller than the bigger colonials in town. In fact, they're shorter than some of the colonials in town.
This is going to work.
Your colonials on Madison, there are several over there that you built that are much taller than those duplexes.
That may be the case, but Madison is a flat road. It is not,
No,
you're not.
my point is, he could have put up
on
one
me.
of those Madison-type houses, and it would be taller than the building, the duplex that's there right now.
Right, and I don't know.
That's
that
why I'm
we're
saying, I think you need to look at, this is beyond
Right.
duplexes. This is a
Yeah.
bigger question
Right.
about height limitations.
Right, and there should be, I agree that there should be some height limitations and some special permitting in place. There's nothing we can do with what's out there now, but we can certainly help alleviate the problem in the future.
You're saying the height restrictions, limitations need to take the topography into account too, and that gets complicated.
Well, no,
I'm not
I don't
disagreeing
know that, I
necessarily.
don't think that,
It does.
I wouldn't
Because
suggest
you
that,
have
I
to be able
don't think that
to
can be the
not
know
case.
by right what you
Yeah.
can do. I
Right,
mean,
I don't think that that can be the case,
Right.
but certainly, it's something that through the special permitting process can
Least
be taken
evaluate.
into account.
4 duplexes, but we would have that
Right.
benefit from.
Michelle?
So if I could just address what George said, I think now because inventory is so tight, just so tight, that you have a lot of guys or companies coming in that will take, and I see them all the time and I work with them, they'll take a ranch, existing, gut it out in the middle, they get a good price when they got it, and they sell it for, you're just not gonna believe what they sell them for in the neighborhoods, double their money.
sure.
Say, it's all through Northgate with the capes, it's all through Pine Haven with the ranches, and I've done them up on Western Terrace, you know? So, but I do agree, especially along Main Street, where you have the really much older homes, you know, with the fieldstones, or the concrete blocks, a lot of those situations where residents want to preserve those, I think when you go into the basements and you actually look at the way the foundations are, you're not able to preserve some of those buildings, and that's really sad, but it's, you know, I mean, I sold the yellow house that's across the street from here, you know, you have to go in and look at their basements to understand, basically, you know, some of those aren't worth saving, you just can't simply save those properties. But some of them that are built in the 50s and 60s, they're still pretty solid. It's just like George said, they bought them in the 50s and 60s, they became older, and they stopped updating them in the 70s, and then, you know, time has gone on. But you get somebody in there, they can update that, and it's a nice, single-family home for someone who's looking for newer construction. I just would be interested, just while we're talking about it, and I don't know if this is for, when we go into the master plan, how the board feels about expanding it out to the industrial and to the business south. Because I think there are parcels of land there that we may just sit on for a really long time, and I think those are opportunities where that could be a nice little development out there. You know, one of them I think of is the gentleman on the interest of Bartlett Street and the one that was, he wanted to come and do a storage unit. Lyman, Bartlett and Lyman, you remember that parcel?
Ian Gow.
That would be a perfect property for something like that. You know, but
And what
that's
makes
some,
it perfect, just so, educate me about what you're seeing from a real estate perspective.
I think people would move in. I think that's a good location. Do you know what I mean? But I just think there's a lot of land that's not getting developed out there, and I think the residents might have a better palate for it not being in the neighborhoods. I think it's in the neighborhoods that's making them nervous. I think the 2 properties into Pine Haven were perfect lots, but if you start creeping into Pine Haven, and you get, all of a sudden amongst the ranches, you got one large, you know, duplex, that's gonna it's just too much for that neighborhood. The same with Northgate. So I like the permitting process, but what if you can't deny it? You know, because we've always been told with special permits, you can't deny it.
You
Special
won't
permits
allow
can be
with
denied.
conditions.
Well, site
allow
plan
with
review.
Conditions. Right,
You have to
so,
have, I mean, you have to make findings and so forth. I mean, you can't just sort of use a special permit to say
Right.
yes or no. I mean, you have
Right.
to have some standards, but
Right.
you can deny a special permit if it's not appropriate for the site.
okay,
It's very
so,
rare.
Well, that's,
Very
but
rare.
that's a policy issue. I'm
Right.
saying
Yeah.
you can't do that.
Right.
Now, I'm
Yeah.
not encouraging you to get special permits in here just to deny them, but, you know, I think that,
I think the special permits are really for those 2 neighborhoods, which is the RC and the general residential. I don't think there are issues in the other areas. I really don't.
and all I was trying to ask you was,
Yeah.
do you want to start changing these other districts now when you're just starting a master plan process? That's all I was trying to get
Yeah.
at. Is there a bigger conversation here that maybe you need to have and your community needs to have that's ripe for 6 months from now as opposed to now? That was my question.
And I would agree with that, especially in terms of the new areas that you're talking about.
The industrial,
South,
yeah.
Yeah, that would definitely be part of
And you're
that
right,
plan.
but I would just be curious, there's 3 members that are going to be on the master plan board, so it's just food for thought, because I think those areas.
Yeah, I mean,
should be opened up.
it's interesting food for thought, and I think that, there's a balance too, Michelle, like, on the one hand, you're trying to satisfy the concerns of your existing residents, but you also want to think about what kind of environment are you creating for your future residents. So some towns just don't allow single-family or two-family, small-scale residential development in an industrial area because of the concern about a conflict in land use. But I think there may be opportunities, like on the periphery or in areas where it's zoned industrial but not really suitable for industrial development, where maybe it is worth looking at. But I think it's a master plan question.
I was actually thinking about the overlay that we had done over near the Wegmans project. Remember how we talked about that?
Sure do, oh, God, I do.
And to me,
Yeah.
that seemed like appropriate, Nothing's happened, but it was,
Well, we were trying to make that legal.
Teresa, I was just going to say, as you talk about maybe like RA and RB, just, again, some historical information about that is that, if you look at the maps, and, I've obviously got the bigger one that's easier to read up and back of me, but when duplexes were allowed in the RA and RB, they weren't built. I think we have 1 or 2 duplexes in all of RA and RB. So,
How many years has that been? Over 10 years? Or?
like 40, 50 years.
Oh, okay. Well, some of it, so.
So it's not, so it's never been there's never been this rush on, let's build duplexes, even though they've been allowed in the RA and the RB.
It's land cost.
So we changed the zoning, as Judy had said in the beginning, in 2009, and we took it out of RA and RB because the discussion at that point was, we should be focusing more dense housing on the smaller lot sizes. I mean, that's why they're
But
smaller.
we did give them accessory apartments.
Right.
And that was where that all
Right.
came from.
But since 2009, there has not been one application for a duplex in the RA and the RB where someone has asked for a variance. So I just think that's telling.
I hadn't thought of that.
But does it
hasn't-
all come down to like the developers? What about the residents, like from the people I've talked to?
This has nothing to do with, I'm just telling you,
Right.
permit-wise, and it makes no difference to me if it's a resident or a developer, or a lot of the developers are residents. I mean, that has nothing to do with land use. I'm just telling you
this is all
what
okay.
the permit history has been,
My
and
concern
what
is
the
just
demand or not the demand has been.
These 2 here.
I just feel like there
If
might be
well, let me-
demand.
Can I finish?
Oh, sure.
So in the RA and the RB districts. And then if you, I went through the zoning all the way back to 1955. Zoning was adopted.
I was
here-
too.
Zoning was adopted in Northborough in 1954. In 1955, I have the zoning bylaw, which just allowed, it's very interesting, single-family homes, commercial, and slaughterhouses. So that's what you had in 1955. So then I jumped to 1963, as far as what we have for, actual physical copies. And in 1963, from then on, duplexes have been allowed by right in the residential and residential C and general residential. So, again, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, I'm just telling you that that's what the pattern has been, or the history of what your zoning has been. And then, I just wanted to correct one thing, just because we're on TV and I know other people watch this. I talked to the superintendent of schools, and there is no increase in class size happening. Class sizes are decreasing. The duplexes have no impact on the school system any more than a single family. They see there's no correlation between class size and duplexes. And the superintendent also said she'd be happy to come in and talk to you if you wanted to have a bigger conversation about that. And I said probably during the master plan, would be the appropriate, time for that. But I just wanted to correct that so people out there, do not go away from this thinking that class sizes are increasing in Northborough. They're not, they're decreasing at this point.
See, I think,
Can I just have a question? On one of your survey questions, and
Yeah.
I actually liked this idea a lot.
What was that?
Was you had asked about,
In 1 or 2, Michelle?
I think it was one where you talked about an overlay, where if they wanted to go into a certain area, that there would have to be some sort of working with the neighborhood, and then it would have to be town meeting approval. What were your thoughts on that?
Oh, well, what I meant, no, they would not have to go to town meeting. You would create the overlay district, and you would say, these are locations where we think it's appropriate to have two-family dwellings.
Okay,
And those would just, and it might overlay a part of RA, it might overlay a part of RC, it might overlay a part of GR. That's kind of, because overlay districts don't have to follow the boundaries of an underlying zone.
Okay.
I was just saying that you could basically more target where you wanted them to go. So perhaps you're not opening an entire RA or an entire RB, but rather portions of it. That was my question.
okay.
Something else I just wanted to, I'm not going to stop, but something that's interesting to me, listening to this about how far back two families have been allowed, and now all of a sudden you're seeing this kind of activity that's disturbing to you. I think you might want to also think about where we are demographically as a nation. That something could be on the books for a long time and no one does anything with it. And then all of a sudden, a bunch of people are my age or older. And so they're selling properties, they're moving out. And so that, to some extent, is part of what you're seeing here, that you've had these land use regulations that were not necessarily activated because you didn't have the amount of activity going on with an aging population of people moving out of these small homes. And so I think part of what you're seeing here is part of what's been going on in the suburbs closer to Boston, where you've got a generation that's moving out or looking for places to move out to. I mean, I don't know where they're going when they leave here, but your story about an older person who's basically doesn't have a lot of money to maintain their home, but they're trying to hang on, there's a lot of that out there. And I think that's part of why you're seeing this sort of influx, if you will, of these two-family structures. It's a demographic issue as well.
So understanding that the master plan committee will most likely, if not definitely, take a much closer look at this process. Right now, we have a moratorium, which will not stay in effect for another year. And that being the case, does the board have some idea as to what, if anything, they would want to do right now? George?
I don't have a problem with a special permit, so I'm okay with that.
And are you okay with keeping the districts where it's allowed
Yeah,
in place as it is right now?
I am.
Okay. That's the-
Definitely special permits. I think looking at the dimensional requirements would go a long way. And in terms of the areas where they're allowed, I think, given that the master plan is pretty imminent, I think it would probably make sense to defer that. Defer changing the areas in which they're allowed.
Okay. the
So
zone.
basically, dimensional dimensional constraints or whatever, and special permit.
By dimensional, do you mean height?
It's everything, right? It's height and it's
Whatever.
It could be any, it
Yeah.
could be anything.
Coverage.
open space, land
setbacks,
coverage, yeah. all
Probably
those-
height and setbacks mainly.
Yeah, we'll look at all that.
Is that something you're prepared to look at tonight?
No, I don't have the,
Only because we
have to, that's true.
kind of have a hard deadline
That's true.
coming up, so, and not a whole lot of meeting time left.
That's true.
So that's, so one of the things is that we have to consider how much of this can we put over to master plan and how much, but still keep us satisfied that there's enough in place to sort of protect, at least at a minimum. So it's something to think about, and I can come back to you if you want. That's fine. Michelle?
So as I indicated before, the concern that I've been hearing from a lot of people is RC and GR. They don't have, I think MSR and DN sort of take care of themselves, and I'm sure eventually we'll see them in RA and RB. But what I would like to see, if we included all of them, is that Kathy did a lot of work on this, if you remember when we were talking last December. She came forward, and that's where we ended up in town meeting. We ended in town meeting because the board was disagreeing on the setbacks. Had we all agreed on the setbacks that Kathy had given us, we wouldn't be here tonight, because I think those are good. And Kathy's setbacks were for RC, instead of your front for 30, it went up to 40. Instead of your side for 15, it went up to 20. And instead of your rear for 25, it went up to 50. And those were the same numbers she used for GR. And those were the numbers that Kathy had suggested after working with staff last December. And because the board didn't agree, we didn't have a unanimous vote, we decided to do a moratorium on it. So I really think the board should at least consider what staff had recommended for those setbacks last year, in addition
That
to.
was RC and GR?
Yep.
So we had 40 front, I actually didn't bring that with me, Michelle.
So I looked at all your notes from
45,
last,
20 side?
20 side,
Okay.
50
then yeah.
rear. And that's what you had recommended for both RC and GR last December.
Yep.
And then Amy had recommended the same. I don't think you increased them, I think they were the same, but we didn't have a majority vote. And that's why we went on for the moratorium. So at least I think we should go back to the residents with at least that, if we're going to include RC and GR, because
With a special permit, Michelle?
with special permit, and the planning board being the permitting authority. And I agree, looking overall after we go through the master plan about the whole dimensional.
I agree with Michelle. I mean, I'd like to see it, of course, doubled because it's 2 houses on 1 lot, but if everybody could agree to at least make them a little larger, I agree with the ones Michelle said that we talked about last year. Main Street Residential, though, is a very historical area, and I would like to see those just conversions without tear downs, just because a lot of people look at that as our historical downtown, and to see that torn down, I think would make a lot of people upset. Like, even with the affordable housing that they're building next to Trinity Church, the main point was they're gonna keep the buildings looking the same. And Main Street Residential only goes from the library to Stone's Motorcycle Shop. And that's like the character that's left in the downtown. And I think if those are torn down and you see 2 duplexes thrown in that are totally out of character, I think you'll get a lot of feedback from the residents. I know they're upset. And back behind there, GR and Summer Street, a lot of people take a lot of pride in keeping up the houses there and keeping in the character of the neighborhood. And I did talk to a lot of people back there, and they don't really want to see duplexes in their neighborhood. I think there was an email written because they put a lot of pride and money, and they feel the duplexes that have been put back there on Summer Street don't match with the character of the neighborhood.
So,
And I know they're selling the duplexes, but it's because Northborough is a hot town right now. Everybody wants to move in for the schools, so they're gonna buy, but it doesn't mean that it makes it better for the people who are already here, just because the duplexes are selling.
No, and I understand that. I just was curious, who's buying them?
Right.
There's been so much speculation here about the schools and everything. I'm thinking, well, who's actually buying them? And no one seems to know. So I think it's an interesting question in the master plan process is why is there this market? And it might be right. It might be because it's new construction. It might be because of the schools. I don't
Simply
know.
new construction, people love new construction.
And there are article after article about the schools, like it's one of the top in the country. It keeps being touted at the high school and.
Well, yeah.
But
No,
there's
a lot of
also,
stuff.
if I could just add, sorry, and then I'll let you go. There's also a lot of clients who like the dense housing. So I'm not going to deny that. I think they like it. They would not like to live where I live with 2 acres. They're like, they like it, right? So there's that definitely is up and coming, like I talked about, where people like those small cottages versus having a connectivity, sharing the same wall in a duplex. So I think you're right. That's the changing pattern that you're seeing in housing. I just think for the master plan to take a look at this, I think we should go back to what your original proposal was, Kathy, back last December.
well, so in terms of the dimensional requirements, I don't know that we have enough time to actually engage that, just because I know, at least for myself, I need more than just numbers on a page. I have a hard time visualizing what that actually means. So I'm not really, if the rest of the board feels as though they can do it, then that's something we can certainly discuss. But for me, telling me that it's going to be pushed back another 10 feet doesn't really mean much to me unless I can kind of see what that actually does mean, what the effect actually is. I think that also just the 5 of us sitting up here trying to do that tonight without more input from the people who it's really going to affect wouldn't necessarily be the right approach to it. But having said that, I think that maybe part of the solution short-term, meaning during the master plan process, would be to, in addition to a special permit, can we also require design review for any 2 families? So, because design review can certainly take a look at these potential projects and make sure that they're consistent with what's around, to a certain extent.
Last year, we had language proposed to include duplexes in the site plan process.
Right.
Um,
Yep. We talked about this even 10 years ago.
Yeah, and that's a very easy, I think that it's a very easy proposal for you to make. It's I mean, if you're gonna be requiring a special permit, and I wanna understand right now, because right now it's in general residential, duplexes are allowed. In RC, it's a special permit through the ZBA. So what you wanna propose is a special permit in both districts with the planning board, not with the ZBA. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Right.
Okay, so I think it would be very easy to, regardless of whether you do dimensional changes or not, but to get that duplex into a site plan review process. Because I know internally in-house, that, excuse me?
You could do that.
Oh, I know internally in-house, that's, that just gives us the ability to say, not the best place for the driveway, or, let's take a look at the topography, maybe there's something else we can do that, could offset, just the siting of the building through the site plan
So
process.
site plan in addition to special permit?
Yes,
Site plan
yes.
within the special permit.
Yeah.
Okay, and design review?
I think, and Judy, I'll defer to you. Our design review right now, we don't have any regulation or any guidelines for single-family or duplex.
Is that something that has to go through town meeting, or is that an internal
No, all you need to do
adoption?
in your zoning is provide for them, and that they're on file with the planning board, and you do it administratively.
So we can do it administrative,
Yeah,
so
you
as
just want the
part,
zoning bylaw to authorize them.
Yes.
okay, yeah.
So, but the only thing I would caution maybe about that is that we wouldn't have those guidelines. Well, maybe we would.
don't. Well, I
Well,
don't know, what's town meeting?
We don't have a contract with Judy. We'd have to look for that.
But I mean, you can do that, just to
We-
alleviate your concern. As long as the zoning bylaw says, subject to design review, design guidelines, adopted by the planning board and on file in the planning department, then you've bought time for yourself. I'm not trying to cut you off. I'm
Right,
just saying
no,
that you
so
can do that.
I'm saying, so we could do those, again, we could, but it's not under this contract with Judy, but we could.
That's okay.
I mean, Judy has done our design guidelines.
Whoever.
Judy, no, I mean, I'm saying we can't do it under what we presently
No,
have
I know,
with
I'm
you.
just saying, I'm not trying to promote myself,
No,
I'm just
but-
saying I think you could do this.
But we want to, with Judy. But we would have the time so that by town meeting, because it's really not that difficult, and there's people in this audience that would be very helpful in helping us
Well,
with
there
that.
are also some out there, I mean, some
Yeah.
models you can.
But, so we would be able to have something in place to go to town meeting to say, yes, we do have those guidelines in place, as opposed to saying, oh, we don't have them, we don't know what it's gonna look like. That would be, to me, that would be a really hard sell if we didn't have those in place. So
Right, up to you.
Okay. So, George, how do you feel about design review?
Before we wrap this up,
We're not wrapping it up yet.
Oh, no.
there's 4 people out here who, I'd like to hear from them
Well,
to help
I appreciate
shape
that.
some thought pattern, rather than us discuss it for an hour and a half, come to a conclusion, and say, what do you guys think of our conclusion? I'd rather get some more input before we even get remotely close to coming to
I appreciate that. So we'll get to that. So my question was, what was my question? How do you feel about design review?
I guess I would defer to Tom and ask his opinion
Okay.
on that, and then rely on Tom's opinion as to whether. how
Okay,
I
so
feel.
you know it's a public meeting, not a public hearing.
I understand.
Okay. Leslie, do you have an opinion as to design review?
No, not a strong one.
Not a strong one. Michelle?
I just want to add to the last comment, if we don't go to town meeting with something, I'd be very disappointed as myself, not only as a resident, that we had a whole year to work on this, and we talked about it over and over again, bringing up, it got bumped meeting after meeting, so for us to have a whole year and wait till the last meeting before a bylaw has to be written to say, we did nothing, we're gonna add it to the master plan, is so upsetting to me.
Who's saying anything
But I
about
don't think that's what there's, I don't think that's what.
Right.
people
Oh,
are
that's what
saying.
I thought you were saying, we were gonna put it off.
No, I think there's some bigger decisions that probably
Right.
need to be
Yeah.
put off to the master
You're
plan.
talking about maybe possible dimensional for
But you're talking
town
about
meeting.
just a special permit.
You're
being
talking
added,
about
but-
special permit, you're talking about adding it to the site plan review process.
But can I
This
just
would be
make
all
a
town
point?
meeting.
We had a majority vote
Last
last
year.
December to include these setbacks. Referred to us, here's your memo, by you. You sat down with staff and said, we are recommending, because of all the complaints we've heard, that these, and we had a majority vote.
But then we,
So I just find, we can't go back to the residents and say, the only thing we're gonna do is special permit. You're gonna
Right.
get shut down at town meeting.
I mean, just looking at your, I'm trying not to insert myself too much in this, but just looking at the dimensional standards you have now for setbacks, 40, 20, 50 in those two districts really should be fine. It's a modest change in what you have now. I don't think it's that draconian. I mean, that's just my view, but I think when you're talking about mixing two-family homes into a single-family area, there's more than setbacks, which was where the design guidelines would, or design review would be very helpful. I mean, it's little things like, where does the driveway go? And how do you separate it? I went through this in Watertown, that's why I just know this so well. Where's the driveway go? And how do you ensure an adequate separation between a driveway and the next property over? But those are all things you can deal with in a set of design review standards for two-family homes. So the setbacks, I mean, Michelle, to your point, those setbacks look pretty good to me. Now, that's
The current setbacks or the proposed
the
setbacks?
ones that were proposed that you seem to have some agreement on. I think they look pretty good. 40, 20, 50 isn't bad.
that's what I agree with now.
Those
too,
are,
like,
those are the same ones from last year?
Yeah, it's what Kathy had given us, right, Kathy? I mean, when we all started this back in November, Kathy went and talked to staff and did the crunching of the
Right.
numbers, and they came up with 40, 20, 50 on those two areas where the residents were coming in and having concerns. But we didn't have a majority vote, and then it was one meeting where, Amy came back with some more data, and then, it's sort of, but at that meeting, when we were going to go, we didn't have a majority vote, which is why we asked for a moratorium.
Did you not have a quorum?
I was in the hospital.
You weren't there.
I promised that
I thought we just never,
I thought leading up to that.
I will never let that happen
Listen, I
again.
wanted
Elections, we
more.
didn't take a vote, but that we decided we just needed more time to study it, and we would take a
Right,
moratorium.
but the
so we
majority of
would-
us
Right.
I mean, you're
were
talking
agreeing
40,
with-
20, 50 in a district that's 30, 15, 25.
We also had proposed,
that's that bad.
and I'm, just to put it in context, as staff, we'd also had proposed that along with those setbacks, that to increase the lot size, by half. And, that's where I think some of the board members, said no, that they weren't in favor of that, so.
Wasn't there something on the frontage as well? An increase on the frontage?
Well, yeah, along with, yes, that's right.
Well, yeah,
Excuse me,
because
along
part of
with-
this is the separation between the
Yeah,
properties
yeah.
too, so.
But yeah, it's 150 where you already have 150 down here. But I'm just looking at for discussion purposes, only your table. You increase them to 150 for the frontage, right? Which is
Well,
what Kathy had
they're
recommended.
150 in frontage, now I'm saying for two-family, it's 200.
Okay,
Yeah, well, that's if you were
Right.
doing RB, I see what you're saying, right. RC and GR, I would say 150. I'm just trying to provide that
and you're
separation.
actually right, now that I think about it, Kathy, I do have numbers here where your proposed numbers were like 22,500 for general residential and 30,000 for RC. We're right now for general residential, you have 25,000, you recommended 30,000.
Yeah, that's what I did, was just, yeah.
Yeah,
But if it's a bigger lot size, don't you end up with the bigger building? So you end up with the scale issue?
Well,
I guess we can
no,
have that.
that's where,
The setbacks.
that's where we increased
The setbacks
where
and the-
we proposed increasing the setbacks, because
And that would
you,
keep it at the same scale then?
but you also, again, what is not in our zoning bylaw is a height limitation.
Right.
Is there
That
one
was
in?
the thing I was more concerned about.
We
than
didn't,
anything.
we didn't propose one in last year, only.
Yeah.
But there's one on here.
Oh, yes, there is one, yes, being proposed here, absolutely, with Judy's table.
Okay.
And I just, again, some of these may be bigger than you want to take on.
I will get to you guys, I promise.
But I just, to me, this is, I honestly have never worked in a town that didn't have a height rule.
Yeah, and 35 is the
For a
standard.
residential district.
I
I
mean,
mean,
everyone
I've
agrees.
never worked in a
State
town,
building code's 45.
I've never worked in a town, I've never seen that for a single-family or two-family dwelling. I've never seen that height. 45, I've never seen that.
That's a state building code.
I understand that's the building code, but in zoning, they can require something less.
I mean, 35 is, well.
35 is standard.
I'll leave it to the median.
I've seen it both ways. I've seen 35 to the pitch, to the peak, with 30 at the median. I've seen 35 at the midpoint. my opinion is 35 at the midpoint drives a big house. So, you're asking me, I'm just giving you recommendations, and again, you may not want to go this far, but I think you're going to have to look at this. Because even if you said, no more two-family dwellings, you are going to see single-family homes that are very different than these small homes in these neighborhoods. The character issue isn't going to go away.
Yeah,
It's not likely to go away.
Yeah,
I think part of it is our ability to sort of control how different it's going to be.
I understand.
One issue that was in the survey, I believe, which was to make the appearance of a single-family home from the outside. So you go in through a single door and then you
that's
split
an
off
easy
from
one.
there.
That's pretty
That would
typical.
would that be
That
part
is
of
pretty
design
typical?
review?
That's a pretty typical requirement.
Okay, because that would,
We wouldn't have to be, I mean, you can do design review, but I mean, that's,
But would that suggestion have to be part of design review, or would that have to be part of the zoning bylaw?
I would put it in the zoning.
yeah, we would
'Cause you're
revise the
really
definition of
putting
two-family to
limitations.
include that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one way you could do it.
so that addresses the character. If we address the scale issues,
Not necessarily. I mean, it's like a whole package that has to go together. I mean, you can't just expect if you say, but it has to have the appearance of a single-family house with a single entrance.
Facing the street.
You could still end up with, a very big building that you believe is out of context with the,
well, like you said, that issue is not going to go away, though, with single families, because people are building larger homes.
I'll give you an
No,
example of.
But that's why you also have to include dimensional requirements, possibly
No,
lot size
I'm saying this in addition to
changes.
that. I'm not saying this in place
Oh,
of that.
oh.
Yeah.
No, I'm
I'll give
saying-
you an example of
tweak it
where
further.
that is. That's Ridge Road. You got a bunch of duplexes just as you come off of Otis Street, right? They have a central entrance, and then you go into this little box that's in front, and I actually think they're pretty ugly. You go in the box, and then you go off onto your own entrances. I think from a design standard, it wouldn't be as attractive as having
But
their
they're on
own.
the outside, so it's not going to.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah.
Michelle, what I'm actually used to is there's a single front entrance, and then the other unit is access from the side.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. I haven't seen that.
If, just as I'll be quiet after this, but just like to put some of this design in context, there is I think there's more than one, but there is a beautiful, historic, I have no idea how old it is, it has to be older than 1900, two-family on School Street, with two entrances right on the front, and it's right near Peasley. It's it's one of my favorite houses in this town, and it happens to be a duplex, but, again, just,
Where on School Street is that?
I'm sorry, it's Maple, I'm sorry.
'cause when you were saying
It's
that,
near
I was like-
Peasley, it's near Peasley,
Yeah.
it's on Maple Street.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I do, yeah.
No, it's on the same side as the school.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And then on School Street, there are duplexes also, older duplexes that, again, just design-wise, whether we have it with one entrance or whether you want to get into that tonight, but,
Okay. Back on the dimension, can you just tell me what the numbers are again? Minimum yard setbacks, what do you?
Okay, so right now, Judy, on here, when you have your, for discussion purposes only,
Yep.
under RC, which is one of the areas,
Yep.
you have, under two-family recommending, you have 150-foot frontage, right? And originally, you had 30, 15, and 25. Staff recommended 40, 20, 50. Staff recommended the same for general residential. And the only difference of those two was the lot size, where originally it's 20,000 for RC, up to 30, 15 for GR, up to 25.
40, 20, 50 zones?
Yeah, 40, 20, 50. And that's what Kathy had recommended last November.
40 and 50.
Yeah, yeah. Here's my notes.
So I have a problem with that because that cuts out most lots.
But it also contemplates an increase in the lot size, right? So the lot actually needs to be bigger than, the lot coverage is gonna go from 15,000 to 25,000 in GR, and from 20,000 to 30,000 in RC, so it actually doesn't cut out most lots if you get a lot that
You
big.
got a whole neighborhood of 20,000 square feet. You're basically saying, we've just prohibited duplexes in that neighborhood. I would be opposed to that.
Not every lot is suitable for a duplex.
Right, I think I mean, in
That's-
fairness to everybody here, just because it's in that district doesn't mean that every single lot is appropriate.
Well, I would agree
Every
with
lot
that.
should be developed that way.
But you're saying none of the lots can be.
Well, I'm not sure
Because
that's
they're
true.
all 20,000 square foot lots.
Every-
With minor exception, maybe they're 21, 22, but they're not 25, and they don't have 150 feet of frontage. They all have 100 feet, because that's what the builder was required to have when he put that entire subdivision together. So you've just prohibited them.
Where is that?
You know? Most RC.
No,
My neighborhood,
It's not working.
my whole subdivision. Nelson Drive and back of me, same thing.
Well, I will just say this. I've worked in towns where two-family homes are allowed, where the minimum lot area is the same as a single-family dwelling, which has been your policy here, and I've seen an additional land area required. So you would not be wrong, you would not be somehow out of sync with prevailing practice if you required a somewhat larger lot for a two-family dwelling. And it may be that not everybody can have one.
I'm
I just-
afraid that
I-
very few people can have that.
Well,
That's the issue.
RC is huge. I cannot believe that there's only 20,000 square foot lots in RC.
Majority, vast majority.
It's an enormous piece of land.
15.
It looks like half of it
well,
is,
that may be because earlier, in a previous iteration of the zoning bylaw, that was a 15,000 square foot district. You know,
You have, if we just want to talk about RC for a second. This area of RC, this is your RC, right? Everyone knows that. So I mean, you have this whole area that is basically, 20,000, if not smaller, like Northgate is smaller. There's a lot of pre-existing non-conforming lots there. So that's, I mean, basically, this is built out. Over here, in this is all the golf course. So there's obviously nothing to develop at this point there. Over in here, same thing is, I mean, there isn't, I mean, Fred, if you think differently too, but in the RC district, there isn't any land, whether for duplexes or not, there isn't any new land to be developed.
that's what I'm saying, you're going to see more change in that area.
Yeah. They're just, there just isn't any they're unavailable vacant lots. So, and again, that's whether that's for a duplex or a two-family or, a comprehensive permit. It's just our RC and GR are the most dense in town, and they're pretty much built out.
Maybe there's a different way to think about this. Maybe reframe the question. Are you trying to reduce the incidence of two-family dwellings, or are you trying to control how they turn out? Because if you're trying to control how they turn out, you can do that with special permit, with a site plan, and design review. If you're trying to reduce the potential for two-family dwellings, then you would look at dimensional standards. Am I making sense? You've already said, dimensional standards are going to kill it. So, I mean, what is your goal as a board? Are you trying to control how they affect the neighborhood and how they sit on the lot, how they look? Or are you trying to reduce the potential for them? That, I think, is the fundamental question.
I for one, don't want to eliminate them, because I think that they do serve a purpose, a very useful purpose in town. I would prefer to control the way they look, and the way that they appear, and the way they fit into the neighborhood, which is why I was suggesting design review, special permit. But let's run up the board and see.
Let's focus on that question and see where that takes you.
I'm interested in what the purpose is of them.
Hold
I
on.
think that was my first question.
Hold on.
Well, but whether you like it or not, someone's buying them. So they're serving some purpose. They may not be serving yours or yours or yours, but they're serving somebody's purpose. So I think you decide as the board, do you want to control the way this land use sits in your town and looks in your town and it relates to their neighborhoods, or do you want to reduce the potential for them?
I don't know. Definitely the first, and whether the latter, I guess if you can effectively accomplish it through the former, then you don't need the latter. How effective that will be, I don't know.
We can do all kinds of things with design, but,
Yeah.
you know.
Control, I guess, but limited control. I'm not anxious to stop two-family construction in town.
Michelle?
So I would say control, but again, I know you don't have any authority on design review to deny
You want a
anything.
special permit.
I've been on the board a long time.
Whether you do
So-
use it or not is a separate matter, Michelle, but you have the authority.
Right. So I still go back to those two areas, right? It's what started the discussion. It's where we are now at a standpoint. I still feel like it's a compromise with the dimensions to see how it works out. I mean, again, we can take the recommendations that Kathy gave us last year, go through the master plan and come back to it again. But that's why I think it's not an easy answer when you have those two neighborhoods in there that is everyone's concerns. So I think it's difficult to control in those two neighborhoods by going through design review and the special permit. I do. I just do.
Okay.
I think you need more guidance.
Okay.
I agree with Michelle. I mean, I think we need some dimensional setbacks, and I know that Kathy just said she talked to the superintendent, and numbers are low. I also talked to the chairperson on the school committee, and she said numbers are low this year, but they go up and down every year. And we're talking about Northgate, and that area, that's where I live down there. My kids were in Proctor, and kids are getting bused between Proctor and Lincoln every year because of the numbers going up and down. And I know the parents, and I know people are upset about it. And if we're saying we're gonna leave Northgate and that whole area the way it is, so every single house there can be torn down and be a duplex in the future, I think we have to also think of the residents that are here. Not just how many people we want to come in. I mean, it's gonna affect the taxes, it's gonna affect the schools. I really think, the master plan 20 years ago, or 1987, which is more than 20 years ago, said you're gonna be nearing build-out, and maybe if we hit build-out, it's not that bad. And there was also, I have the master plan right here, and they did a summary of the people who lived there at that time, and it said people are less concerned about providing diversity of housing types. There is more opposition than support for larger multifamily structures. And the residents I talk to that live here in this town right now are talking about that, and they're upset about that. The people who live in the neighborhoods where the duplexes have gone up are like, why? Why my neighborhood?
Well, I think you gotta separate the density design issues and the sense of a neighborhood impact of a structure from the schools. And I will encourage you not to go too far down that path, because in 1987, we were dealing with a different legal scheme. So I just wouldn't even go there. But I think certainly talking about the impact of structures on a neighborhood is a valid concern for a planning board. And so
Right, so it would change the
Focus on
character
that.
if you have
focus on that.
duplexes springing up here and there throughout the
Well,
neighborhood.
duplexes alone don't necessarily change the character of a neighborhood. Big duplexes, big tall duplexes built out to setbacks that really were intended for a smaller structure, that can affect the character of a neighborhood, absolutely.
Well, I would like to see the setbacks that are on your proposed paper. I think it
Can I
would.
just ask a question?
You can ask anything you want.
What if you kept the setbacks, but then kept the minimum lot area original the way it was? So instead of 20,000, instead of going from 20,000 in RC up to 30,000, you keep it 20, but then you keep the setbacks.
You can do that.
I'd like to see the bigger lot sizes. I mean, we're putting 2 houses on 1 lot. A
You're
lot of
putting
them
two
are now
dwelling units.
sharing septic.
2 dwelling units.
2
on one
dwelling
lot.
units.
2 dwelling units on 1 lot.
But they're now starting to share septics and,
Okay,
If we keep the current lot, the existing lot size, would they be able to build a house the same size
So-
with the increased
we,
setbacks?
I mean, we can also require that if you're gonna tear down a house, you can put up 1 duplex and not 2. I mean, it is possible to require that, and that's not a difficult thing to say.
Right.
Before we go any
I agree.
further, I think that maybe it's time to hear, if there's anyone in the audience who has something to say, I'd like just your name, your address, and give you just a couple minutes, because it is a public meeting, not a public hearing, so I don't
Sure.
want to get too involved, but go ahead.
My name is Tom Reardon, 7 Sunset Drive. I'm also a member of the Design Review Committee and an architect. And one of the points I wanted to talk about was George's point that if you increase these setbacks, these dimensional changes in the districts, it would eliminate the possibility of having that choice of building a duplex. And one of the factors we're not considering is that in Northborough, you cannot build a septic system within the setback. So if you increase the rear setback from 25 to 50, say, and then you have to build a septic system because a lot of these RC and GR neighborhoods are on septic, you will leave you missing another 50 to 60 feet. So basically, you wouldn't be able to make any changes. And the neighborhood I live in is RC. They're all 15,000 square feet. The entire neighborhood is non-conforming. We're in a groundwater zone, which is further restriction. So you take the septic, you increase the setbacks, and the groundwater, you can't change anything. You eliminate that option.
But do you agree that there may be some neighborhoods in town that just really aren't appropriate for that kind
Certainly.
of development?
Certainly.
And it could be that particular
Yeah.
neighborhood is one example of them, but there are other neighborhoods where it would be entirely appropriate.
But you're also thinking that neighborhoods are static. And for example, my neighborhood was built in the 50s and 60s, mostly capes and ranches. That hasn't stayed that way.
Right. I'm
They're
sure it
getting
is.
taller. They're adding garages, second floors. They're building out over the same footprint, but the scale is changing. So what was appropriate is for scale 20, 30 years ago is not appropriate now. So it's a very difficult issue to address with your zoning bylaws and your ZBA review. Because how do you quantify scale?
Right, you can't, but
Mass and height?
there certainly is a point when you start with an infant neighborhood, and over time, it does morph up through its adolescence and into its mature years. There may not be any place to go from there, just because of the way it started in its infancy. And those neighborhoods then become the starter neighborhoods for new families. And it's other neighborhoods that then develop further. I don't know that we can always pick on the same neighborhoods for increased growth. Everything caps out at some point. That's just life
And if you add a sprinkler system, you could add height.
to the
and
house.
area, to any building.
Sure.
Not just houses, so.
Well, so long as it falls within the zoning regulations.
Well, we don't have a height restriction in
We
Northborough.
don't yet.
We
will.
have the state building code restriction.
We will. That, you and I are going to disagree. That does not address
Well,
this
that's what
problem.
I mean, one
Does not.
of our former building inspectors, and again, it's not, picking on him or throwing him under the bus. That
No.
was just, he was very adamant, and so we, the zoning subcommittee, decided, okay, we're going to leave this one alone.
He wanted to let the building code be the building
Right.
code and the zoning be the zoning. It
Right.
was a very
And
interesting
he-
discussion.
And he felt that, the building code, would take care of that, if there was any height,
It's not.
questions in town,
It's
but.
not.
Yeah, I think if you put a roof height limit, you're going to make all the structures that want to be taller have shallower roofs.
Well,
You're going to stylistically determine what the architecture is going to be, and I'm totally against that.
Tom, virtually every town I've worked in has a height limit in a residential district, and they don't have flattening out roofs. They don't have
If
it.
they put a ridge limit,
Some of them do, some of them don't. Some
I
of them
can see
measure
that
to the
in
midpoint.
coastal areas and older
I'm talking about
neighborhoods.
all over the state. I
Yeah.
am, sorry.
So let me see if there's anyone else in the audience. Any, there's.
Disagree
with you. Yep.
With some stuff that's, what I addressed. Well,
Start
first
with
of all,
your name and address.
I'm sorry, John, 41 Lydia's.
Okay.
He, like George said, if you do change the frontage or the area requirement for RC lots, you're gonna eliminate almost all the possibilities of duplex. That's like saying, I'm telling you right now, that's like saying, we don't want duplexes in this place. I hate to think that's the way you're thinking, but please keep that in mind. Another thing I could say is, since 1973, houses have doubled in size.
Yep.
That's a factoid. These houses are gonna get bigger. 1,000 square foot houses that you're talking about, a lot of them are gonna go by the wayside. And I agree with everybody that these duplexes do not belong anyplace or everyplace. Someone needs to make a decision as to, is this appropriate for this site or is it not? And that's the tough part about you coming up with rules and regulations. They're gonna cover a large span of area. Every situation, every lot is gonna be different. And how do you do that? People have to do that.
Do you
Someone
have,
has to decide, does this make sense or not?
so are you suggesting that the board adopt a special permit process or something else?
I would say special permit, the board that controls a special permit has got to take it seriously. I think Michelle said that. That's an issue. Because continuity is so important in building. And take these duplexes and putting them in amongst houses that your continuity is gone, but if you have no continuity to begin with, this is a good use for some of these lots. And there's a lot of lots, and they're all over the place. And they're mostly in RC area, because it's too expensive to put them on bigger lots. That's why it's not happening.
I will agree, Judy, and thank you for Tom. I didn't think about that there isn't a lot of sewer as you go out to a lot of RC. So you are gonna run into that issue. So it is with the septic systems
Backyard.
in the backyards.
Is most of RC at septic?
Yeah.
No.
I mean, there's some, I mean, basically there isn't, our A and our B is all septic.
Yeah.
I think it's a real mixed bag. It's only about 25% of the town, 30% of the town that's sewered. So we do have very limited sewer. It's reserved for the industrial districts.
This is all sewer right here.
Not even all of Route 20 has sewer.
Right.
And so, I mean, there's, if you want to say like sort of south of Route 20, it's really a mixed bag of, you know, Amy, you have sewer, right? in
On
your-
Davis Street, it doesn't come down into the
Yeah.
meadow, though.
Is well a factor too? What percentage of the town
No.
is?
Well,
It's up in our,
the town, there's a much larger percentage of the town, at least 75% of the town on water.
but that was part of the discussion
but
back
there-
in 2008, and 2009 about why, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, but you do have to have and it's different in every town, but there is a separation between your well and your septic.
Sure, absolutely.
You know, there's a legal, right.
Hopefully.
Can the well also
We
not
like
be
that.
in the setback area?
No, there can't be anything in the setback area. No, septic, no, and I don't think wells can
I
be
think
either.
wells have their own setback from the property lines. I don't know that it's.
Under Board of Health
necessarily-
requirements.
Yeah, it's not a zoning setback that it can't
Right.
be, and it's a setback that the Board of Health has. And I think it's,
100 feet?
about 100
Separation
feet
between
from
a well and a
the
septic,
system.
yeah, right.
But they're talking about from the property line
Yeah.
or from the front yard. I think it's 20 feet or something up to that effect. It used to be 10 feet, and I think our local Board of Health.
Increased it? Okay.
Teresa, could I
Yes, sir.
say one more thing?
Absolutely.
The conception is that these are growing by leaps and bounds in the number of duplexes that are being built. I believe that in 15, there were 3 duplexes built, in 16, there were 4. And last year, because of the moratorium, there was 1, which would probably equal out to 4, 1 per quarter. So it's not like the town is being inundated by duplexes. And this town, like most towns in this area, are practically built out. So the population from 2000 to 2010 went up 1%. Since 1860, the average is 23%. There's no growth. And that answers the school problem,
There's not really a school problem.
which we don't want to talk about.
Right, which we don't want to talk about.
But there isn't a school problem. That's,
There's not a school problem. So, anyone else? You, sir?
I just want to echo John Hanna, 2 Blueberry Lane. Dimensional regulations would prohibit, absolutely prohibit duplexes in town. I'm okay with special permits. Design review, I think it should be handled on a case-by-case issue. You look at the neighborhood, does it make sense for that neighborhood? Then it should be built. If not, go for a variance or whatever it takes. But I think it should be a case-by-case issue.
John, if
Special
I could-
permit gets you there.
If I could follow up, we talked about changing 3 different setbacks, the front setback, the side setback, and the rear setback. What Tom was emphasizing is the danger of moving the rear setback from 25 to 50 feet could really kill your ability to put a septic system in. Do you have an issue with the front setback being moved back 10 feet, from 30 feet to 40 feet? Do you have an issue with the side setback going from 15 feet to 20 feet?
I do, because of the existing frontage. If you get into a lot of these neighborhoods that have 100 feet of frontage, you're gonna be limited to the size of your footprint of your house, which would eliminate a duplex. It's just,
A garage, 2 garages are 48 feet, 1 duplex.
so it'd be, 2 one-bedroom units maybe, if you like.
Or if you're building in an established neighborhood and everybody's already at 25, randomly, you're gonna push this guy back another 10 feet, which is,
That's what
That's
that's why
not
I did
law.
not change the front setback,
Yeah.
because you have to think about the urban design implications of, now I've got punctuation, and you don't want that, you actually want a sort of a street face. So I would not change the front setback for that reason. But that is interesting about your septic system rule here. I mean, I actually hadn't suggested anything except the side setback, because to me, in the towns I've worked in where this has been an issue, that's been
That
the thing
makes
that people
sense.
have talked about, was increasing the side setback. So, we come at this all from a different perspective, but I think really the special permit gets you the ability, if you choose to use the discretion that the statute gives you, to look on a case-by-case basis at the appropriateness of a proposal on a lot. Design review gets you the ability to regulate the fit of the building in the neighborhood in which it's proposed. The site plan review gives the ability to look at the placement of the house on the lot and in relation to what's around it. So if your goal is to improve the fit of 2-family dwellings in these established neighborhoods, those tools do it for you. If your goal is to reduce the incidence of them, then, this, of course, a significant change in the dimensional regulations is an issue. I was simply suggesting changing, in my table, I'm not knocking what you did. My table was about the side setbacks, because I do think that that's what I've heard in communities where this is an issue, is this sense of, my God, I had this little house that was 1.5 stories next to me, and it was 15 feet from the lot line, and now I got this thing that's 2.5 stories and it's 35 feet high. I think it's the side setback where you really need to think about the separation between the buildings, which was part of why I also was talking about frontage. Just widening the sort of relationship between them. But certainly, if you're trying to make sure that what gets built fits in the neighborhood, special permit, site plan review, design review gets you there. If you want to do, something more, then, you can either do some side setback changes now, or put all the dimensional regulations off until some future point. I will do what you ask me to do.
Could I just ask for clarification then?
Sure.
So you're recommending for RC, two-family is to be 30,000 lot, 150 frontage, stay the same with the 30-foot setback,
The front setback.
front setback, 20 for your side and 25 for your rear, right?
That was what I was recommending.
Right. And it was the same with GR with the exception of instead of 30,000, 25, right?
That's correct, because it's already a smaller lot. And, you know, I'm hearing sensitivity about this. I have not done a super lot analysis in these zones, but I did some. I mean, I didn't just come up with this out of my head some night, eating ice cream in my kitchen. I mean, I pulled the assessor's map apart, and, you know, you guys are right, there's some lots that this would preclude, but there are other lots where it wouldn't. And what I was trying to find was a way to say, you've got a problem here that at least is design, and in some cases, it may be dimensional. So here are some, I think, modest changes that would get you to a better dimensional outcome if you then couple it with design.
This is.
That's just my opinion. I know my colleagues here to my left don't agree with me, but that's where I was coming from.
How would you folks feel about just the side setback change? Do you think that would?
I think that'd be a good idea, not the front and the rear.
So you're okay with side, Mr. Abu?
Again, it depends on where it's going. Like I've got a couple lots right now with no butters. And doing that, you're gonna change the design. We have a duplex that we're building now, that are 64 feet wide, which is the same width as Lanthorn Farms, which I did 30 years ago. So 30 years later, now I've got two houses that have the same width as they did 30 years ago. And most of the lots we're talking about are 100 feet. So it gets critical. That's small. Westboro with 125 foot frontage or, is it one?
Well, but for two-family, they bump it up.
Yeah, so it's, I mean, the entire town is
Not much, but they bump it.
50,000 square feet.
Right. And for two-family, it's 55,000.
Actually, I've actually forgotten what the frontage is for Westboro.
I think
One residential zone.
There you go.
Right,
Right.
it is
So what's the
different.
frontage, Tom? You would know.
I think it's 200.
I thought it was 200.
Yeah.
So in Westboro,
In
Tom, they
Westboro?
only left,
I have
so
it.
you can only allow two-family in one.
Amy,
Yes.
Only one residential
One
zone.
residential zone.
All right.
Westboro,
Listen,
$140,000 more than it is in Northborough.
we need, people need to talk one at a time.
I mean.
Well, it's
you know,
not really
a little late- It's
elitist.
a little late, I mean, new lots, new subdivisions, that's what you want to do, go ahead. But we're talking about existing, we're talking about recycling. Many of these lots, these RC lots that are 100-foot frontage, what do you do with them? This is a good use, and it's not appropriate for a particular lot. Someone from the town should be able to say, doesn't belong there.
I've talked to a lot of residents who bought their first house for $350,000, and they're like, if everything goes up to 500, even duplexes, I wouldn't be allowed to move in. Where this is one family for one family, you have single residential, they move in, they do some renovations, and then they move up, and then someone else new moves in.
Well,
I think
people
it's-
move in, and then they also increase the value of the property by expanding or altering. So
Yep.
I think that the pathway to homeownership that we all sort of romanticize, I don't think it really is today what it was 40 years ago. I mean, I respect what you're saying, but.
Well, these are
but
new
people-
college graduates that can't
but
afford
people are buying-
$500,000.
People are buying a house that's you know, on the lower end of the market. They're getting a deal, and they'll if they don't tear it down, they'll just improve it anyway. So it doesn't stay the affordable house that everybody would like it to stay. The only way you get to keep a house as an affordable house is if you own it and you want to put a deed restriction on it. And otherwise, you know, you have to sort of you think about what is zoning for. It's about a reasonable regulation of you know, of structures, of uses in relation to what's around them. It's about the reasonable regulation of it. So, you know, I don't think you can kind of assume that people are going to, that the informally affordable stock you've had is going to stay that way. I just don't. That's not been anybody else's history, and it's not going to be yours.
So I'm concerned that the original setbacks that we looked at last year, now that I have far more information, so thank you, all of you, are just going to inadvertently create yet another moratorium without actually using that word. on the construction of duplexes in some of these areas where it would otherwise be allowed. So understanding that not every lot can be protected. I think that there is a middle ground, and a side yard setback increase plus the special permit process with site plan review and design review, I think until we get master plan completed, put so many protections in place at this point that I could stand behind that.
I could
I
too.
agree. Yeah, I agree.
And then through master plan, we can take a look at whether
You need to do more or something.
there's more required. And that'll also give us some time to actually get some applications in front of us and see how the process goes.
What
Michelle,
about the
where's your head on
minimum
this?
lot size? We talked about the minimum lot size.
Well, I think the problem is that in these two, in RC and GR, the number of lots that actually meet the 30,000 minimum probably don't exist. Or if they do
Or de
exist,
minimis, yeah.
they're not appropriate for this to begin with.
So that's a little different, because this proposal that we had last year was, I think, put together not only by the current, but was proposed by George plus Kathy together. And the current general residential started at 15, and then I think George said, well, let's bump it up to 17, and then Kathy said, no, 22.5, right? And then current for residential was 20, and then George said, let's do 22, and then Kathy said 30. So in essence, you're saying, just don't do anything with the minimum lot size, where at the time, the staff and even George, who was opposed to it back then, were proposing minimum lot size. I mean, I don't understand how we can discuss this in the master plan, because that master plan committee is not going to discuss this stuff. I mean, are we going to come, I don't,
Well, you can ask your consultants to take a look at this, certainly. It could be sort of a deep dive issue, if that's what you want to do.
yeah, because I'm just really concerned about going to town meeting with this. I mean, I think the residents were hoping for some change, other than what is the change, we're going to go for a special permit. I think they were looking for something a little bit more in substance, so.
Well, I shouldn't be continuing to assert myself on this, but I think the board is able to lead a discussion in which the change that's involved when you require a special permit, when you require design review, when you require site plan review, when you increase the side setbacks, the board is capable of leading that discussion. So if you frame it as not much, then people will think it's not much. But if you explain actually what the benefits of that are, then I think many people will get it.
I think if you asked any developer in this town what it means to have to go through site plan review, they're not going to say it's not really a big deal.
Right.
I know, Teresa, I sat on the board for years.
I know, but it's not, I think.
I'm not, and
Adding-
can I say, by the way, and you've even known this, Tony, there've been many projects where we've come before and we've done site plan review, and we've said, it's not allowed, but it works, and we've allowed it. You know, you guys know it, you're all before us, we've allowed many projects where it hasn't worked. I just feel like we need something to go back to the amount of complaints that you received that started this discussion back in November, so.
Could I
And the
ask a question?
ZBA.
How many lots in RC zone have 30,000 square feet? Do we know? How many lots, GR have
So,
25,000?
Tom, we don't know that, that's
I think
why
that's
last,
information that's available.
but we did,
From
Tom.
David, right?
Yeah, you can get that easily.
Tom, we asked staff to go and look at this last year, and that's when staff came back with these recommendations.
Well, I'm just saying, if you don't find any lots that have 30,000 in RC, you've just eliminated that building type.
But I think what
Mine
Michelle's
does.
saying is that.
I could build a
looked at.
duplex on
I
my
mean,
lot.
is that- Did you actually look at it?
Right, yes, we did look at lots, but we didn't look at it from the perspective of saying, oh, how many existing
You took
30.
an average.
Right, how many existing 30,000 square foot lots are there?
Right.
We looked at it as that if you're going to, build a two-family house, you perhaps may need to purchase 2 lots. I mean, that's, or a lot and a half or something. I mean,
So if
that's.
you found a cluster.
Our position wasn't, and again, Fred, if you have a different opinion, but I mean, myself, Fred, and the building inspector, when we looked at it, we didn't look at it, again, as from a perspective as a resident or a developer. We just looked at it as a land use pattern. And what should we be proposing as dimensions for this particular land use pattern?
So if you found a pocket of 30,000 square foot, you could do an overlay district saying, this is where you have enough land, this is where it could be permitted, everything else wouldn't qualify.
Well, it wouldn't be an overlay, you're just saying the minimum requirement in this district is X. I mean,
I think if you, personally, if you go to town meeting with these 4 changes
I also want to add in there the 35.
Special permit is only if it doesn't.
for the height, okay, 5 changes.
Sorry. I can't lose sight of the height issue. 'cause
I
it's-
think-
It's a big one.
To me, that's enormous progress from this board.
it is, it's huge. To have a height limit in the residential district?
And,
Huge.
and also, this is a level of review that this town has never had before for this type of land use. So,
You start
To me,
talking about
that's-
things like that, you've really made significant progress here.
Do either George or Leslie, you guys have a problem with the
There's
height
nothing.
restriction either?
Everybody's attention here?
I mean, could it affect, I mean, we're just,
No, can you just turn your microphone on, because people who will be reviewing this tape will listen to you guys.
We're just saying the special permit criteria.
That's fine.
I just asked Amy, would she agree with the question that you asked, which was, can you, if you don't do any dimensionals, is she good with?
We did do side yard
we're
setback.
talking
Side
about,
yard.
Right, but just
we're talking about side
right.
yard setback and height.
Yeah. But would she agree with just site plan review and special permit? She's reading that now.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
I mean, last year we did so much review. I looked at the 9 surrounding towns and they all have way more setbacks than us. Like even Shrewsbury, a lot of their duplexes were in their Lakeway district and it had to be senior housing or affordable housing. And Southborough, you have to have 6 to 8 lots and it has to be contiguous and.
I know Shrewsbury really well.
Right.
And in the Lakeway District, there were special rules written, but in the Residence 1A and 1 district, the 2-family dwellings, it's a modest uptick in the minimum lot area and the modest increase in the side yard setbacks, but the front and rear setbacks are the same for single-family and
And
two-family.
you also just, I caution you this all the time, and also the ZBA, when we're looking at, changes in Northborough, it doesn't matter what other communities are doing. Every community is that's why there's 351 communities in Massachusetts and 351 different zoning bylaws.
right.
Because every community is unique. So just because I live in Shrewsbury, just because Shrewsbury does something doesn't mean that it's good for Northborough. Just because Westborough changed something or Marlborough doesn't mean that it's good or bad for Northborough. You've got to look at what your own land use patterns are and what's appropriate for your town.
Well, Tom's
When
2
you
points
look at
about
those
the
last
rear
year-
setbacks with septic, and Tom's point about front setbacks with inconsistency
Yeah,
with
you
the
don't wanna do
line
that.
against the street, those to me are huge factors that need to be taken into
That
consideration.
actually would be an incoherent design solution.
Yeah, so.
You have these holes
Right there.
walking down the street.
It's the deal break, but the side setbacks make sense.
Amy?
What about the
Sorry,
minimum lot area? I mean, those were decided.
Well, I think that did we determine whether or not there's any buildable lots if these lot sizes were increased?
I think what they did was draw an average.
Yeah, I didn't.
We don't know.
No, I don't have a number for you.
You don't know.
No, I mean, we are very familiar with the town, but, we did not go through and say,
Right.
oh, in this part,
There was no inventory taken.
yeah, in this part of town, there's 6 lots that this would apply to. In this part of town, there's, 25 lots that it would apply
Too
to.
bad you can't meet one more time before the deadline.
When is our
because we
next
can have that
meeting?
answer.
That's what I was thinking, we should.
I can have that answer for you by Thursday.
When is our
night.
next meeting?
I mean, you can meet. I mean, your next meeting is, right now proposed,
How about Thursday night?
your next meeting
I don't think we have enough time to publish.
is proposed for, February 13th.
There's a CPC meeting Thursday night anyway.
But don't we have to do it before February 4th, didn't you say?
February 5th is when the town administrator requests that when boards and departments have their warrant articles into him.
Did I hear you say requests?
Mhm.
Okay, so it's
But-
not a, okay,
So
I have a little wiggle room.
okay, all right.
I have a little.
February
Okay.
6th.
Just because we waited so long to start the meetings.
This- Well, do we have to publish notice,
No.
right?
Yeah, I need,
Get on the
tw-
bad list.
I need
And-
24 hours.
Oh, you need
I mean,
24 hours.
Excuse
Can't be
me,
here the 13th, just so you know.
yeah. I mean, I need 48 hours. I don't know why I said
Oh,
24.
okay, okay.
The Tuesday, the 6th, well, it's, Judy's gonna be our most limiting.
I can do Tuesday the
Yeah,
6th.
Judy's always the problem, right? Thanks.
Tuesday the 6th
Next
works
week
for
is
me.
Judy's
disaster.
availability. Tuesday, the 6th works for me.
Works for me.
Yep. Yep.
Good.
Tuesday the 6th.
Work for you?
I'm supposed to be in Cohasset that night.
What about the 7th?
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm in Natick that night.
What about the 5th?
This is open space, if that
The
matters.
6th is fine.
The,
Or is the
Judy's-
6th not fine with Judy?
Judy's
I
not.
just, that whole week I'm booked.
Oh,
well, 5th too?
Then maybe we have enough information.
I'm booked that
Can we do
entire
it?
week.
Yeah, so I'm thinking maybe we have enough information
We may,
to have it at this point.
She's booked.
That whole week is just, it's gone. I mean, you know what it is, it's town meeting season is what the problem
Yeah.
is, so.
What is it that, what is the discussion that you want to have at
I
another
think
meeting?
that really, the sticking point seems to be the lot size.
My
So if
concern
it's
is,
po-
sorry.
So if it's possible to have some idea as to whether there are 25 or 30,000 square foot lots in these two districts, and if so, how many? I think that would better educate us and so we can make a coherent decision. If there's only two 30,000 square foot lots in all of RC and one 25,000 square foot lot in GR, then it doesn't really seem to make sense to bump those numbers up to 25 and 30.
Okay.
And if
My
I could
only
just
con-
add to
sorry.
that, just a second. For some reason, we got this chart, and in the chart, there was the current proposed and what Kathy added. So it was 15, 17, and 22.5, and then yours was 25. So somehow I'm wondering, should be somewhere in between 15 and 25? Because someone proposed 17,000, Kathy proposed 22.5. I mean,
That was on the average.
yeah, yeah.
So, the only concern I have for you is, I wish I brought my other computer because I have ArcView on it and I could have answered this question sitting here, but I don't have that computer. So my only concern is that you can kind of end up down this slippery slope of, okay, so there are, out of 1,000 lots in this district, there are 300 that are, 30,000 square feet. I'm a little afraid that the conversation is quickly going to descend to, well, where are they? And how do we know that those particular lots will actually be appropriate? And all of a sudden, I think you've started to get into a level of site analysis here that a zoning bylaw is really not intended to do.
And I don't think that I can't speak for everybody on the board, but certainly I, as a member of the board, have neither the time nor the inclination to do that.
Okay.
I really just want to know how many lots are there, because if we are inadvertently creating a moratorium, I don't want to do that.
I understand. So here's, I guess the question is, separate from the lot area, are you at least in agreement about special permit, design review, site plan review, and increasing the side setbacks?
And decreasing the height.
Increase, and
So-
regulating the height?
We're okay on this side. I haven't actually made it to this side yet, so. Let's just get there.
I changed my mind. Just kidding.
Let's park the lot area discussion. Not to say it's not
Yeah.
coming back, but let's just park it for now.
Right, well,
Yeah, so where we
that's,
stand
let
on the
me,
other
so
five.
let me make
Yes, dear.
inquiry.
Go ahead.
So I agree with the height restriction that you recommended for 2.5 stories is what you're recommending?
Yep.
All right, 35 feet, okay. And I agree with site plan review, I agree with special permit, and I agree with design review.
And how about the setbacks on the side?
Setbacks on the side, which are 15 now, but everyone along the way recommended 20.
Yeah.
Okay.
Even George recommended 20, so, yeah.
Okay.
Kathy recommended 20, yes.
So you're a thumbs up.
Yeah.
Excellent. And Amy?
Yeah, I agree with that, but I think the minimum lot area should be bigger.
We're not there.
Okay, but we're not there.
Just saying it.
The question is, where do you stand on the
Okay,
5
just
issues?
Put a pin on it, and we'll come back to it next week.
So we all agree on the 5 issues?
Yes, so we're in
Wow.
agreement on the 5 issues. Okay.
I would like to hear a little more about height, because I don't understand your objection to height, and so I need to know.
It's a question of midpoint versus peak.
Well, as an architect, you're reducing our flexibility, but any designer. And if you're taking the grade from 20 feet from the front of the house, we have a lot of sloped sites. You're taking a chunk of height there, and if you have a walkout basement, there's another dimension that you're not factoring in.
Well, you do. You actually write the regulation to account for that.
Well, the way it's written here, you
I
don't
know,
get that.
I
So
know, I
my
know.
argument would be, go to median roof height, which is consistent with the state building code. Nothing is to ridge.
So can I read what the
The building
definition of
code.
building height is?
Sure.
And if this
This is building code or your,
This is in our zoning bylaw. The building height shall be measured as the vertical distance from the average finished grade at the perimeter of the building to the average height of the highest roof plane.
yes.
Building height shall not include spires, spires,
Expired.
cupolas, antennas, or similar parts of structures which do not enclose potentially habitable floor space.
So that's how you define how it's measured, but what you don't have is a metric for the
The
residential
actual,
districts.
yes, the actual number. Okay, so the,
But the building height definition is.
It's already there.
it's already there.
Okay.
So you could
But
just
what
keep
is
that
it?
definition.
What's the height, 45?
There's no heights.
There's no height metric
No, I
for
know there's no
residential.
height.
In the zoning bylaw.
Right, that's what we're talking about
So
adding.
35 with that definition would be fine.
Okay, fine. So,
That's what we're talking
To
about.
the
Okay.
ridge line, I think is too restrictive.
35, we heard it.
everybody
Okay,
agrees.
all right, so quickly, no more questions. No more talking, no more talking.
Thank you.
Okay, so then we've resolved what we can, I think, on this for tonight. We're gonna reconvene next Tuesday on the issue limited only to the lot size, minimum lot area size. I do understand from the four of you, I think you're probably all in agreement, that your concern is that if we bump up the lot size, that we may be eliminating the district. So we're gonna poll the areas to see if what is available. And then after that, we'll make a decision, and I think that'll be it, right? For now.
Yeah.
Anything else on this side before we move on to the next topic of the day?
I
Since-
would like to know how many lots there are, as well as how many lots have the 30,000.
So that you want the total number of lots and the number of lots that reach,
The existing number of lots that we have in these two districts today.
okay.
And then the number of
Break
lots
it into quartiles.
that may be 25,000 square feet in GR and 30,000 square feet in RC.
So I think we need to know kind of what's over 20 and 15. What's over 20 and 15, because it could be that 30,000 is not enough, but 22 might be appropriate, or 24 might be appropriate. So, I think we need to know just what's over the current lot size requirements.
Yeah.
And,
Maybe in buckets of
yeah,
5,000.
Quintiles or something, I mean.
Yeah.
Well,
just so
no,
we
not
can sort.
5,000, because in your proposal, one only went up by 2,000.
So I think if we can just break it down a bit. Will they be able to do that in a week?
I could do this tonight. It's not hard to do.
Okay, so I'll take that as a yes.
I'm serious, it can be done. Very.
So am I. I'll take that as a yes. On
Jeez, like
this side
chomping
of
at the
the
bit to
table,
do it.
is there anything else on this particular issue that we need to get to tonight?
No, but if we meet again next week, will residents also be able to speak? If developers get to speak, can residents speak?
Okay, so yes, but we're not gonna hear the same thing more than once.
That's fine.
And we're not gonna have an entire room full of people.
I'm sure they're not.
Talk out loud
I just want
about
the
this, because this
same.
is a public meeting, not a public
Right,
hearing.
right.
So there's,
And frankly, although they have an opinion, to me, this is a policy issue. And, I will continue to say, of course you care about what people who live here think. Of course you do. But you also need to think about your future residents as well. And I just think this is a land use policy issue. And you have a policy that's been in this town for a long time. It is now rubbing up against conditions for which perhaps it wasn't intended. So how do you then continue to accommodate the objective of that land use policy, but make it fit in the neighborhoods? To me, that's it's a design issue. It may also have dimensional proportions, but people don't want, how do I say this respectfully? People are very concerned about development in almost every town. If you let everybody decide what was going to be built on the lot next to them, you'd have a real problem in your town. And you can't, you got to sort of balance what are people's concerns, hear the concerns, and then ask, well, what are the options for addressing them? One is to just say, we're not going to allow them at all. One is to say, well, if the concern is the size, that's a dimensional issue, or it's a design issue. It doesn't necessarily mean you get rid of it. But I would cut off any discussion about schools.
I know, but what about density in the town? Like I hear a lot of,
Yeah, I think that's where you're gonna go into the master plan.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah,
I really do.
that's-
I'm just trying to be fair. It's like a
Yeah.
master plan process.
Can I just ask one quick question, Judy?
Yeah,
On the frontage,
yeah.
is it consistent with all the communities that because the lots are always set as George had said, and we know that in some of these areas that they're always 100 feet, that you increase it to 150? Are you seeing in the other communities that they're increased, or they just, the frontage stays the same? Because that's a difficult thing with frontage. You're never going to get it unless you buy some of it from your
I know.
And then that makes them non-conforming.
Yeah, and there's no way, unfortunately, to give you an answer of how many lots are in this frontage category, because you just can't pull it out of the GIS data, it's not there.
So you can do this.
You can do a lot area, but that's about all you can do. To answer that question is a much more involved thing.
Yeah.
I have seen frontage increased for some uses and not others, and in other towns where it's single-family or two-family, tend to be treated as a land use,
So regardless
as
of what goes
opposed to
there.
multifamily.
Okay.
It's not uncommon for single-family and two-family to have the same dimensional regulations. It's also not uncommon to see a little bit of a difference.
And then just one more question.
Yeah.
With driveways, we don't really have anything about driveways, and we've talked about it as a board somewhere down the line doing it. But now that it's coming on the forefront, I've been driving around watching other towns.
Yeah.
Some towns, they have the separate driveway, some have the one. What's more common? That it doesn't really,
The towns I've worked in that are trying to regulate the impact of two-family homes, because you're not the only one where this is happening, require a single driveway, and there's a separation between the driveway and the adjacent lot. So then you talk about, well, what's the side setback? Do both sides have to be 20 or 25 feet, or can you do an average? Can you perhaps push a house a little closer to one side in order to have a buffer here? I mean, and it depends on the lot, it depends on where it's located, but it's too, if you're trying to have it look like a single-family home, you don't want two driveways. You know what I mean? It's just thinking about, well, what do you mean by this? It's not just the doorway on the front of the house, it's like the whole lot. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Market-wise, you might not like it, but that's the reality. If you're trying to make it look like a single-family home and blend in a neighborhood, then you need to think about the site as a whole, and not just the front door.
Okay. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
You are more than welcome to stay for marijuana.
Oh, my God, no.
I don't mean that like we're passing it around. We're just discussing bylaws.
You had me there.
May
I
I
will
ask?
not want to be United
For
North Andover.
marijuana.
May I take a self-promotion?
I'm going to go
Yeah,
ahead
absolutely, go right ahead.
and at least prepare what you've agreed on tonight, what you
That's
seem to
fine.
agree on.
Yep.
With this lot area thing kind of parked, all right? And so I can at least get that back to you.
Yep.
And maybe the town administrator would have the deference to just wait a few days on this last piece, but I don't know, but.
Thank you. May I ask a
Yep,
favor?
thank you.
Can I get all your autographs? I'm up for re-election. If you wouldn't mind, just not voting for me, just to get me on the ballot.
Kugel Schreiber.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for your input tonight.
Yeah, it was very helpful.
Very helpful.
It was extremely helpful.
Thanks for letting us.
Things you never think about.
Good to see you.
Nice to see you, too.
When are we going to get our industrial design guidelines?
Why do you?
It's no hurry. You have any samples of residential design?
I'm getting yours.
New?
Ah.
No.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for coming, you guys.
I am,
Thanks for being here.
I think what it is Main Street.
Okay. It says I stole it. I have one of those.
How many do you have left?
Good luck. Is this recreational marijuana we are labeling over here?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Well, we're
Well,
about to wrap it up.
Yep, we're gonna wrap it
We're
up.
prohibiting it.
Okay, so Kathy gave us red-lined changes to the draft articles.
Oh, could I just ask a quick one? Are we changing the meeting from the 13th to the 6th?
Did we just agree to come on the 6th?
And not the 13th, right? We're not going to,
That could, yeah, I don't,
Yep.
I have a couple of public hearings lined up for your March 6th meeting.
okay,
So, I don't,
so just change
I'm
the
going to
13th.
try
Yeah,
to be
I
here on
don't-
February 6th if you're going to meet that night. I'm going
Okay.
to try to make it work.
I don't have anything scheduled for February 13th.
It would be nice to have you. If you can't, we understand.
All right,
But it would be nice.
So
We're
we'll
gonna,
can-
we'll
we'll
start
kick
at
off.
7 and,
Yeah. Reschedule the 13th to the 6th.
all right, so, you know, I'll have to do this after. I'm just gonna put it on my phone, but I'll wait. So we are dealing with marijuana. So, one of the, I'm noticing on the draft article, by adding paragraph G, 7G to section 705020, I don't know how to differentiate these.
Which one are you on,
The one that
Teresa?
is the table of uses, part B on the front.
Table of uses, part B.
Yeah, where
Okay, so
the
that's
marijuana
the-
social consumption operations is redlined in. That was the question that I had.
Yeah, so this is the one to allow recreational marijuana. Good
night, all.
Thank you, Judy, take care.
The one that Judy is talking about. So, yeah, you had asked me questions about, could marijuana social consumption be separated out? I spoke to town council, yes, it can, so that's why it was then added to the use table as, you know, specifically calling it out and prohibiting it.
Okay.
And I think that was the only change.
And
Oh, no, and then I, at the very end, I added in the section about no use variance,
Perfect, okay,
which is the same thing we did with prohibiting it.
Right.
That no use variance could be granted.
right. Okay. Any questions on this one? Nope. Any questions from this side on it? Okay.
Good.
All right, good. And so the reason why we're not talking about the social consumption operations anywhere is because it's prohibited and there's no use variances. So we're really only dealing with the establishments because it's permitted in that one district, and so we have to do something. Okay, all right. And so the next one is table of uses, Part A, resident districts down at the bottom.
So that's the one prohibiting it, and the town council had added in had added in about the marijuana accessories. That was something that was discussed heavily at the selectmen's meeting, and I didn't have it in your last draft. So everyone, and we had talked about it also, adding that in. So I needed to put that in. And then the section about, same thing with the use variances, that's right up above the table. So that's, you know, again, that's the prohibiting of the, you know, use variances wouldn't be allowed.
Okay. And then, oh, I think I have the same thing twice.
Yeah, that's, yeah, me too.
Again, I've always just included the general bylaw, and, you know, you have enough to wallpaper, but it's a selectman. I mean, I'm assuming I'm gonna be, you know, unless one of you wants to do this, and we still have time to discuss this, but I'm assuming that I'll be the one presenting these. So the general will, you know, be bundled into the zoning packet.
Okay. And, no, I think Leslie and I both have 2 copies of the same article.
Oh, instead of,
No, and we have the other one.
okay,
So, but there's only 2 with red line, and then the general use one, right?
yes.
Yeah, okay.
And then
Yes.
there's one silly little article that I have to add, housekeeping. In the site plan, and we've talked about this again, it's not fascinating, but there's the wrong section is referenced. It's just incorrectly referenced.
Okay.
So, believe it or not, it has to go through town meeting in order to change this.
I believe it. That's fine. Okay, so this makes it correct, not more wrong.
Correct.
Okay.
This corrects
Okay.
it to reference the correct section.
Because that would actually be kind of
And
funny.
then we'll have, for your next meeting, we'll have the proposal for the duplexes.
So do we need to take a vote to do anything with the marijuana articles at this point, or are we good to send them
No,
along?
I mean, you don't have to take a vote, just give me, yep, we're good with this language, and because that's what I'll advertise.
You're good with all of it?
I was gonna go home and read it, because was concentrating on the duplexes. So, I mean, I am pretty good with it, but I mean, if we could vote on it next week, just go home and.
I don't know that we're actually even going to vote on it, so
Oh.
I think if there's a minor edit or change after you submit it,
I mean, I don't
Is
think
that
I have
okay?
anything,
I mean, a minor edit, I mean, you can always go less restrictive, you can't go more restrictive once I publish it. But I wouldn't be publishing it,
You guys know I'm still not in support of this, right? I'm not gonna support it.
that's fine.
Okay, all right, just checking.
We're not voting.
Just checking.
Michelle's not here, we're not voting. Just,
wait, let me just think about this for a
You're not in
second. If I'm
Either
advertising
of
for
them?
March 6th.
there's two.
Yes, you can
Yeah.
talk about this again if you want.
I probably don't, but I was concentrating on the duplexes that I didn't really,
Yeah.
read it
You
closely.
can, if you want to have this again on your agenda for the 6th.
Okay.
I can do that. But it's shortly thereafter that I have to get the ad into the newspaper, which is, and that's what,
Okay. So can you do me a favor, just take a quick look at the changes?
I'm good.
Oh, you are good?
I'm good.
You've seen them? Okay. All right, so they're probably, from what I hear from Amy, they're probably going to be fine. But the 6th will be our drop dead date on them, okay?
Okay.
Figuratively, right?
Yeah, nobody's really dropping out. I don't have that kind of power, I'm just the chair. But that's it. As I said earlier, it's just a title. And then we have an amended application for 89 West Main.
Yes, so that's the one that the applicant has requested it be continued on the ZBA, but they've been meeting diligently with the design review committee. So we believe they're going to be ready to go for the February 27th ZBA meeting. So they just, put their revisions together, and we just asked them to revise the application. So that's what you have in front of you. And then also, for the planning board, I just wanted to, at your last meeting, we handed out the 172 Barefoot, which is,
She lost her keys in the restroom, that's
Oh.
why.
so
Their own
the,
pot out there.
so the 172 Barefoot is before you. It's in the industrial district, and it'll be going to design review February 9th, hopefully, Michelle. Does that work for you, February 9th?
Yep,
I've actually only heard, I know it works for Tom and Diana.
Yeah.
So, okay. So that's a public hearing that you'll be holding on March 6th. So that's the only other thing I wanted to mention for you tonight.
Okay, excellent. Anything else from this side of the table?
I just had to ask one question without all the developers here. I'm just curious about duplexes, like what is the purpose in the town of a duplex if it's not affordability? Like,
It has nothing, well,
I know you said it has nothing to do with affordability,
Yeah.
so what is,
We can't
why-
control affordability.
huh?
it's just another housing form, just like, apartments or 3 families or 4 families, or it's just another housing type. That,
Okay, that's just what I was, because I was just wondering what the need was, and I'm just curious.
it's the only thing a developer wants to build now that's new construction, unless they build a large colonial, so.
but I mean, I don't know, back in, like I said, as far back as 1963, I don't know what the discussion was. Again, it's just a different housing form.
In
It's-
certain towns allow them, in certain towns don't, and that's just,
I don't know across the board. I don't know.
so it's just an opinion on like the character or what you want to allow. I'm just trying to get to the decision on, on duplexes and why certain towns are more open and certain towns restrict them and what the
Well,
purpose of them
I
are?
mean,
I think, as Kathy has said, every town is different. I mean,
Right.
Certainly, Judy comes from Duxbury, I believe, which is an entirely different type
Right.
of community than we are here.
Right.
You know, and we're inland, we're central Mass. You look at someplace like Hingham, which is an even more different community.
Right.
And their reasons are completely different than ours. And I think Westboro, which is really promoting their commercial development, their reasons for their lot sizes or what have you, are fueled by what their town parents want to see in their town. I just think that we can look to other towns for ideas, but not necessarily firm guidance, only because they started different. You know, some towns have started with bigger lots to begin with, so they have the ability to say, well, you can't do less than 55,000 square feet for a duplex, because they started with these huge lots, and Northborough didn't start that way.
Right. But there's nothing saying that town has to allow them in all their neighborhoods either.
No, I
No,
don't think so.
it's just,
no, there's nothing
does
in
it set the
the,
character of the
there's nothing in the
neighborhood?
zoning enabling act in Massachusetts that says towns have to
So
allow
it's up to us as a
duplexes.
board to decide if we want to allow duplexes because of the
It's up-
character.
Yeah, I mean, it's up to the community. I mean,
Yeah.
I would hope it's not a decision that the five of you would just make.
Well, that's what
you
it's
know,
down to,
there's-
though. It's like the five of us.
No, I think we talked
But I
about
mean-
having that go to the master plan.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole process that you should involve, well, for any land use change.
Right.
I would recommend that, I mean, as a planner, I mean,
Okay.
it's all about process.
And,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, remember that we've presented things to the town before that we have thought
Right.
were right, and
Right.
were very much not. And vice versa, you know, so we can only make suggestions based on what we think we're
Right.
hearing from the citizens, but there's always a silent majority that
Right.
shows up at town meeting and has a lot to say at that point.
Right.
And until you actually get to the floor and it's time to take a vote, you don't know what's gonna happen. So if we were to come out and say, no duplexes, because that's what, you know, you're hearing 30 or 40 people in your neighborhood saying, you might have another 3,000 people on the other side of town saying, nope, we want the duplexes. We don't know that, so.
So we'd find out through the master plan process with the surveys, because the surveys in 1987, they didn't want them. But
Right.
now we're
That
allowing.
was 30 years ago.
Right, I know.
Yeah, it's,
I know.
yeah, so
But-
yeah, that's the process that I
Okay.
think Kathy's referring to, is
That's what I'm
that,
thinking.
you know, between George and Michelle and yourself, you guys are gonna get your ears to the ground and hear what people really want.
And that starts probably this year and takes like, what,
18 months, right?
I have no idea.
18-month
Do you-
process?
12 to 18 months is how we bid it out, and you know, it'll depend on sort of, you know, if things are added along the way, if we need to extend the contract, but, so we anticipate the contract was just signed. Believe it or not, there's legal things
everything.
going back and forth, so the contract was just signed this week. So now we'll set up, you know, for when the first meeting will happen, which, again, will be February.
So let me just ask a quick question, Kathy, just on this whole special permit thing, because over the years, we've gotten, so let's say it's an allowed use, someone comes forward, and the board decides it's not right, it's not the right
An
lot.
allowed use or by special permit?
Well, it's by special permit, so it's allowed use by special permit, so they want to go on, you know, whatever street on this lot, and the applicant says, I really want this, you know, it's gonna work, blah, 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 and we're just like, oh, and the neighborhood's like, oh, you know, can you deny it?
It doesn't, you can't go by what a neighborhood says.
Well, I'm just saying,
Right,
people are
when
gonna
you-
say, but when
what
people
you-
are gonna come forward and they're gonna say, I don't
What-
like it because of X, and the board doesn't like it for whatever reason, they don't like it.
Well, again, the neighborhood, you know, abutters are invited into the public process to express, you know, their opinions about it. But just because a neighborhood may be completely for something or completely against it, that is not why you should be deciding something. In the zoning bylaw, it's very specific, but they're ambiguous. But because zoning.
Did you just say they're very specific, but they're ambiguous?
Well, it's, yes, because it's specifically written
Lawyer, you
down,
should
the
know that.
criteria, but if you read the criteria for granting a special permit, it's very ambiguous. But,
Because it says in substantial harmony with the master plan, which the master plan survey, the people said they didn't want.
well, but Amy, you can pick and choose, as you do with the master plan, because if you look at the community development plan and the master plan, I mean, there's, there's a lot of information in there, and you can, if you want to find something to drill home your point,
You can always find it.
you can find it. So, but again, so what you have to look at is the criteria for special permits is, first, there's a special permit with site plan approval section, and then actually, you all got the new zoning today, but it's on page 13, the criteria, so the 7 criteria. So the proposed site is an appropriate location for such use. The use as developed will not adversely affect the neighborhood. So this is why I always talk about how a special permit really cannot be denied, because how do you, this is my opinion,
Quantified adversely.
how do you
affect the neighborhood?
quantify it? Because when you go to court, it has to be quantified. So how do you quantify, there'll be no nuisance. Well, what's a nuisance to you versus a nuisance to an abutter? So that's why a special permit, and I will, retire on this, saying that, special permits are allowing something with conditions to control it. You haven't allowed, you allow something by right, there's no conditions on it. You allow something by special permit, you place conditions on it to make it conform to the neighborhood, or to change it or alter it or something. And then if something is a no, then it's, not allowed. But in Northborough, we allow use variances, so, that's a whole nother, set of standards that you go by. But this is, if you want to get into, you're going to be doing this with 172 Barefoot, you have the special permit granting authority on that. So, you've got to go through this criteria to make sure that, a proposed development meets that criteria, so. Does that answer that, Michelle?
Yep. It's the same thing you said when I joined the board, how many years ago? You can't deny a special permit, Michelle, you can only condition.
Now,
I think the public shouldn't, I just think.
you
the
heard
public
Judy
should know.
tonight, and, saying you can deny a special permit. You can deny a special permit. I've never seen the circumstances where where a board could deny a special permit. I haven't, in this community and in, other communities where I worked before I came here, even though I've been here a long time. But,
Were you working there when you were like?
I just think when you go to town meeting, the residents need to know it, right? That you can't,
yeah,
it's
well,
not to deny, it's condition it.
we
and-
can talk about,
Yeah.
that there's special permit
Well,
criteria.
I wouldn't say that you can't deny it, because you're saying legally you can.
Exactly.
You may say it might be a challenge to, but I
Right.
would not say
Yeah.
it can't be, because that's legally not a
And
condition.
you can
Right.
come out with conditions that they can't meet, which
That's
is
true, too.
effectively denying.
Yep, that's true, too.
Right.
You can place
Prove it with conditions, but the conditions, they just can't meet those conditions.
It's cost prohibitive.
Is that as in
Well, if they're
defensible?
reasonable,
Well, if they're not, if they can't meet them, how is that reasonable?
if everybody else could, that's trying to do
Right.
something similar.
Okay. So, yeah, I do not want to go on the floor of town meeting and say that they can't be granted. They can't be
So that,
rejected, denied. Denied, that's it. Right?
well, again,
Don't
you're-
want to say they can't be denied,
Right,
because they can.
right.
So whatever we allow is going to be allowed.
So do we have anything, I think
whatever
we're
we
in
decide to
discussion,
do.
Linda, do we have anything more to?
No. Would you like to adjourn?
Yeah, does anyone have anything else?
Anything else?
All right, make a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Seconding that motion? Okay, so
Seconding,
moved.
thirding.
All in favor, aye, we're
Aye.
good.